John, can you start the live stream, please?
That is started. Thank you and welcome to today's Angus Health and Social Care Integration Joint Board meeting. Before we start, I just want to acknowledge that June is Pride Month, and I would like us to celebrate that by expressing our solidarity with our LGBTQIA+ siblings, citizens in our community and our staff as well. So thank you for allowing me to do that. So I would like to welcome members to this hybrid meeting of the AHSCP Integration Joint Board and remind all attendees that this meeting is being recorded and webcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. Some members have joined remotely, and could I remind all remote attendees to mute your microphones when not speaking, and please raise your electronic hand should you wish to speak. Please do not speak during items unless I invite you to speak, and for members present, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. And as a wee aside, if you are online and need something to eat, could you please put your camera off? Thank you very much. That's a wee bugbear of mine. And my laptop has just decided to crash. So if I hand over to Karen, please. Oh, have you got it? No.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies today from Tracy Bowman, Suzanne Flower, proxy today is Karen Fletcher and Dr Emma Fletcher. We also have, hold on a second, Chris Boyle, Richard Humble and Catherine Lindsay joining us remotely, with all other members of the board present in the chamber.
Thank you very much, Karen. Moving on to two declarations of interest and statements of transparency. Does anyone have anything they would like to raise? No. Oh, sorry, Alison. Alison Clement.
With regards to the GP premises paper. Started working now. Yeah. With regard to premises paper, I just wanted, for the sake of transparency, to highlight that I am a GP partner in Angus and so have an interest, but I think it meets the criteria of statement of transparency. Thank you.
Super, thanks. I think you're absolutely critical to the discussion anyway, Alison, so thank you for that. Okay, and if we can then move on to item 3, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. So page 5, if I can take you there, please. I'm going to take it as read that you have read all the papers. Are there any factual inaccuracies in the minutes that you're aware of? No, and everyone's noted as being at the meeting. Thank you. So are we agreed that we can approve those minutes, please? Thank you very much. And the next item is the action log on page 11. If we can go to that. Gail, are you taking anything through there?
Yes, Chair. The first point that's noted as read is overdue, but I can confirm to members that adults with incapacity internal audit report, all actions are now on target and a full review will be completed and a report will come back to the IGB in October. Can I draw the Board's attention to another item that I've got under 7th of December 2022, and that's the finance report section, which is also in red, and again recovery report will be delayed in June and is now being brought forward in August, and I'm sure Sandy Berry will update you in his finance report section about areas there. The red under October, item 13, Angus and Dundee stroke rehabilitation pathway review, that is on the agenda for this afternoon, and the agenda action points will be updated accordingly. And the same with the Angus Alcohol and Drugs Partnership update. That's on the agenda this afternoon and the action point will be updated.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions on the action log? Thank you. I'm not seeing any online and none in the room. Okay, so
Colleagues, we've lost online sound.
sorry, that was my fault. We're back again. So that's the action log is noted. And item 3C is the minutes of the Audit Committee from Wednesday the 26th of April. And before I open it to questions, I'll just go to the Chair, Andrew Jack, to see if there's anything that he would like to say in advance. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's nothing really to add to the minutes as they're published, but I'd just like to highlight that the 26th of April meeting, in addition to the scrutiny of standard audit planning and follow-up actions, the committee also received a report on the full internal audit of the sustainability of primary care. And just finally, as a reminder as well, as well as the previous role of the committee in internal and external audits and accounts, we now review the assurance of risk management and direction to partner organisations. Just to highlight that fact.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions on the minutes? No, thank you. And I'd just like to say I was at the NHS event in Glasgow on Monday, and primary care received a very high profile from the Cabinet Secretary for Health. It's a national issue, and I think we're all very much focused on that. So thank you very much. So can we approve those minutes? And if we can go then on to item 4, which is, there's no paper, it's just a brief update on adults with incapacity. And members are requested to note that Angus Council Scrutiny and Audit Committee on the 25th of April, Internal Audit Activity Update Report 107/23 recommended that a full review of our guardianship process should be undertaken. This review is underway and an action plan has been developed to support this. All actions are progressing with the aim to have the full review completed and reported to the IGB in October 2023. Okay, thank you. And item 5 is the Tayside Primary Care Strategy, and members are requested to note that ongoing work has been progressing to develop a Tayside Primary Care Strategy in order to ensure good communication and involvement. A wider engagement is being organised with a view to bringing a report to a later IGB, and I understand Gail has a wee update on that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've been slightly ambitious with the timescale there. We intended to have an event through the summer period in July. Unfortunately, due to annual leave, we've been unable to organise that until towards August. The date's just been finalised at the moment, so it is unlikely that I would have a report ready to bring forward to our August committee, so that will be delayed to a further meeting. I think it's extremely important that we have full engagement from all relevant stakeholders.
I would support that. Does anyone have any questions for Gail on that? No. Okay, I think that's understandable. And it's a tricky time of year, so happy to progress on that basis. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, moving on to item 6, which is appointments. You'll have seen the paper. Can I move to the recommendations 1 and 2, that we agree to designate Gillian Galloway, Head of Community Health and Care Services, as Deputy Chief Officer for a further period until the end of July this year, in order to support operational demand, and agree to designate Eunice McLennan, Head of Community Health and Care Services, as Deputy Chief Officer from the 1st of August until the IGB in February 2024. Anyone have any questions on that? No, we're happy to agree that. Thank you very much, everyone. That's great. And if we then can move on to item 7, and just bear with me to let me get my page. And that's the Mental Health and Learning Disability Improvement Plan. I'm going to ask Gail to come in at this point. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. The purpose of this report is to bring forward an updated mental health and learning disability services improvement plan. Now, this follows on from the special meeting that we had in Angus on the 27th of March. As you know, that we've had an immense amount of work following on from the Tayside Whole System Mental Health and Learning Disabilities Change Programme, so I make no apologies for all the papers that I've attached for your information this afternoon. This is to provide a response to the final report of the Independent Oversight and Assurance Group on Tayside's mental health services, and that report was submitted following all of the IGB special meetings to the Scottish Government at the end of March. We have received an acceptance of our submission, and I shared that with many of you throughout, I think, last week. The Scottish Government have published the final report, as you're aware of, and they have also included our RAG status in that report. What we've identified in today's paper is a current position. Now, that current position, we have an executive leadership group, we have a programme board, we have agreed terms of reference, and both continue to provide that leadership to support the delivery of mental health and learning disabilities whole system change. There are 12 areas and work streams that have been identified. You may recall at the development session, we only had 7, and or 8, we were required to produce that extra 4. They are now included in your packs for information today. They're summarised in the table for you, but I have information in the report. The financial implications are still being worked through, and we still require a financial framework which will describe the resources across inpatients and community health services. Appendix 1 in your pack today is the report from the Perth and Kinross Chief Officer, and it notes some potential resource implications in the report. We have also included the EQIA that has been developed for the whole system at this stage, but I can assure the committee if there are any points or any comments, we will take that and we will make the relevant amendments. The EQIA is for the commencement of the programme, and it will be further supplemented by individual assessments for each of the 12 work streams that's in the paper. The programme seeks to improve outcomes and experiences for anyone in Tayside who either has or is connected to someone with a mental health or learning disability need. And it seeks to do so regardless of protected characteristics. So it's not anticipated that people with protected characteristics will be specifically affected in a different way to those without. Hopefully that's clear in the EQIA. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Gail. Now, yours is still on, Gail. Sorry. Thanks. Well, we get used to this. If you have any questions, could I ask you to please reference the page number, because there are obviously quite a lot of pages there. It would be helpful so that we're all looking at the same bit. Does anyone have any questions? Peter Drury online.
Thank you, Chair. I note on page 29 that there was a genuine concern expressed by the stakeholders about it being overly ambitious, which we can understand, I'm sure. Are we involving the stakeholders sufficiently?
Gail.
Peter, I could say if Jackie Pepper was in the room, she would say absolutely. She said there's many, I can't quote off the top of my head the number of people that are involved, but I could certainly get you that information, Peter.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter. Anyone else? Lewis, Councillor Speed.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wondered if you'd be able to point out to me where within the report and within the whole table, you said be specific with a page number, but I'd probably say within the whole plan that you would be able to point out where prevention and early intervention is, where the words prevention and early intervention are.
Apart from going through it all here, Lois, I'm not sure about which page number that would be on at the moment, but I can certainly look to that and get hold of that and give it to you. I would have to go through all the pages.
It probably leads more to my comment. However, Chair, I'm happy to come back in once everybody else has had an opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you. Jill.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Speed, just to come back on that point, I think from a Tayside perspective, the ethos of prevention and proactive care underpins and underlines everything that we are aiming to do in terms of that whole system change. In terms of the information that is included in here, there are further detailed action kind of improvement plans that sit underneath them. So if we could potentially pick that up out with this meeting, and if you wanted sight of that, then we can see what we can do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That'd be helpful. Anyone else got any questions? No, not seeing any online. Lewis, sorry, I forgot, and also I forgot to put my mic on, so I'll have to go over all that again. Anyway.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it was just, I think, just to echo what Peter kind of mentioned in terms of the service user concerns, and I think throughout this whole journey in terms of the mental health reporting, what struck me just on the way into the meeting today was that we actually haven't had anyone come to an IGB board meeting, you know, within Angus, who perhaps represents Angus with done, or anyone with lived experience, which, like I say, so I think we do just need to keep ensuring that Angus voices continue to be within that pieces of work that go on. And like I say, I often complain and criticise sometimes very lengthy, very wordy, and buzzwords and straplines are used, and really often question what does that really mean at the end of the day for the service user, for the patient that's requiring care and support. And however, I have picked out those two words that, even albeit this is a strategy, I would have still expected to see prevention and early intervention within the plan that's set out. And I'm disappointed that there is no reference there. But I appreciate the assurances and the comments from Gillian Galloway.
Okay, thank you. I think Gail wants to come in again.
Yes, thank you, Lewis. I will take these points back, particularly to the executive group, and I'll ask Jill to do the same for the leadership group. And apologies for putting a member of staff on the spot, but Terry Irvin is actually in the room and chairs our mental health group. She's behind you, Lois. Terry, I don't know if you can add anything around service user involvement or engagement from our local Angus.
Yeah, I suppose. Sorry, Terry, would you like to come down to the end just so that people don't have to turn around? It's because I found that quite disconcerting when I've been in committee meetings before. It means we can all see you. Thanks.
Hi, yeah, I'm in a lot of these groups across Tayside. I also chair the Angus Mental Health and Wellbeing Network, and within that, the third sector, also the voice of lived experience in carers. I'm also support Angus Voice, the voice of lived experience in Angus, and we've been working really hard with them to get their board up and running a bit more robustly. They've now got, so we are doing a lot of work in Angus to get that voice to lived experience, and also that Angus Mental Health and Wellbeing Network is really brilliant to get everyone together, have those conversations in a really supportive environment too. But you were talking about prevention and self-management. I think it's just not explicitly mentioned, so I could talk about one of them, specialist community mental health service redesign. Although that is about getting the right people into specialist services, but also about strengthening the prevention and early intervention. So a lot of that is, I know I'm going to an event and I'm talking about this work we're doing about looking at non-complexes and getting GPs and third sector much more involved, so people are getting the right support at time. They're not sitting on waiting lists for ages, which might have happened in the past, or they would be referred to statutory service because there's nothing else out there. We've done so much work. We've got in every GP practice, we've got peer workers, we've got the listening service, we've got social prescribers. So it's such a focus to get in early for people in the local area and not have big waiting lists. So very much part of that, but probably there's so much, it's just not represented, but it's definitely something we should be mentioning within this paper.
Thank you.
Thank you. Of kind of inpatient hospital admission. So it's good to hear that, you know, there is real consideration given within the community.
Sorry. Okay, thanks. Alison.
Yeah, I would agree. It does seem like it's focusing a lot on the inpatient side of things, and Living Life Well for me was a much wider piece of work around how mental health, and the change areas really do focus on a change to the inpatient bed model, whereas the wider pieces of work and the specialist community mental health service redesign very much as this community mental health rather than the wider system. So it's really, for me, stopping all the other bits of work that need to happen around Living Life Well, recognising that this is the priorities identified for the NHS Tayside group have very much focused on secondary care, just redesigning inpatient beds. I think we have to be honest about that, and I think the next paper on the agenda around Angus Living Life Well for me makes sure that we are looking at the entirety of mental health and prevention, and that's the bit I've been more involved in, and I am very confident that we are looking at the whole of mental health in its entirety there. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. That's pretty much what I was going to say to close that conversation, but thank you very much for raising it. I hope that gives you some comfort, and we can talk more about that in the next paper. Okay, so if we go back again to the recommendations, 3 recommendations there. Can I ask that we accept these recommendations as detailed in the paper? Yes, that's lovely. Thank you very much. And if we move on to agenda item number 8, and just let me get the page, because there's a lot of pages. There we go. The Angus Living Life Well Summary Update Report. And I just wonder, on the back of that conversation, we actually start with a narrative from Gillian. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, Terry, want to come back up because you've been critical in terms of the work associated with this. So thank you very much for the opportunity to come back. It doesn't feel like a year ago. The implementation plan around Living Life Well, and members, I'll remember that Angus kind of went out on a limb with this and decided that we would develop our own implementation plan in the absence of a Tayside-wide plan. And I'm really pleased to be able to bring this report back, which does demonstrate a lot of the work that Terry and the wider team have progressed within community mental health and learning disabilities. Just to pick up on a couple of points that kind of follow on from the last report, one of the things when we were pulling this report together, we were very keen to include what impact and what difference we've actually made to people within Angus as a result of some of the work that has been progressed, and that is why we have included some service user feedback as part of the report. I think just to draw the members' attention to the number of actions which are complete. There is nothing in terms of the plan itself that we have any significant concerns around in terms of the timescales. And again, following on from the IGB in April, members will be aware that priority 4 absolutely remains on mental health and wellbeing across Angus, of which this work will fully support. Terry, I don't know if there's anything that you want to highlight just exceptionally.
The one thing I think it'd be quite good to highlight is just going on about that, a little bit more about that peer support. If you look over a year, we had 2,464 referrals that went into mental health and wellbeing peer support in Angus, and only a tiny number had to go back to GP, only 86 people, and only 257 needed more specialist mental health support, and that meant that people got support in the local area really quickly. within a week, rather than waiting on statutory waiting lists for support actually that met the need better in the community. So I think it just really highlights the excellent amount of support that is in our community now that wasn't there a few years ago.
Thank you, Terry and Jill. Does anyone have any questions?
Chair, if it's okay to come back in, I don't know if Dr Clement wants to add anything, because you've been supporting community mental health, and from your perspective.
There's probably two things that I think that the board need to be particularly aware of. One is around the long waiting lists in Angus for community mental health team, and that is because we have prioritised the urgent care and the legislative requirements which we've been asked to do, and we've got good performance and improving performance in terms of our use of inpatient beds, and it is related to a shortage of consultant psychiatrists, and that is a considerable risk around mental health for us locally. We are working on making sure that the people that most need seen are seen, but it does mean that for other more complex, still quite complex mental health things that can't be managed by a GP, people having to wait. In order to address that, we are doing quite a comprehensive piece of work at looking and reviewing these waiting lists and seeing who could perhaps be managed better instead of being waiting for a consultant. So that's one piece of work that I think is important in terms of being aware of the risks, and a particular piece of work around ADHD and autism, neurodevelopmental disorders. The other aspect that I think we'd like to highlight is the urgent care, and that we don't have this 24-hour urgent crisis centre. And for me, there's a big piece of work around how we work better earlier and perhaps don't need to have this focus on a centre. And I would particularly highlight the rollout of distress brief interventions within primary care. It's worked in other areas of Scotland, and we're working very hard on that, and hopefully that will reduce the demand and act much more in prevention. And also that we've got the psychiatric emergency plan. I think it's here about to be launched, but it actually is now approved, and that's very important for us. And I think we need to have a quality improvement approach moving forward, where when things are maybe not, people listen to people's journeys, and when things are not maybe going as well as we thought they should, then we're going to review these cases and look at how we can input into the next psychiatric emergency plan, which hopefully won't take 10 years this time, look at aiming for 2 years, and that we make sure that we continue to improve for people around their journeys. So that's very much in the plans over the next year or so.
Thank you, Alison. And for me, in terms of crisis support, it's about people getting the support they need at the time that they need it, in the way that works for them. So I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. On page 97, under adult integrated mental health services, the percentage of staff completing mandatory training has increased. I just wondered what that percentage was sitting at, and what plans there are to increase that. And also that 92% of appointments for the 7-day CMHT service are attended, which I think is a fantastic percentage. And I just wondered what that service is doing differently to get such a high attendance and such low DNAs. Thanks.
Hi, it's Terry. I think for the mandatory training, I don't have the figures with me just now, but we could get you them. But it's just our yearly report is showing an increase of staff doing mandatory training. I think over COVID there was so much demand for other things that maybe fall by wayside a little bit, but we're being much more robust about what training we expect from different staff members, and that's across the Health and Social Care Partnership, and recording it really well. So I can't give you those figures just now, but we're certainly keeping an eye on that and support and training. The other thing you were saying about was the 92%. That is very high for mental health. And I think it's just about the 7-day service just being really proactive about trying to support people, because that's our most risky people who've been referred for support at the weekend. So we really do have to be proactive and take the approach of continuing to try and get in touch with people if we can't get in touch the first time.
That's brilliant. I think that's really important, and I think that's something that we could maybe replicate wider across different services, because the people who do not attend for whatever reason you know, that's having an implication elsewhere. So thank you very much. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, a comment. I'd just like to commend the work that's gone on in this plan. There's some significant progress being made. On page 104 of the combined pack, I was interested to read about the work of the Tayside Mental Health Training Partnership and the rollout of a more comprehensive training programme for staff. I wonder to what extent that training would be rolled out to other providers and partners. You know, lots of anecdotal evidence of people running food banks and heat hubs and befriending schemes coming across people in real crisis, but possibly not having the resources to support them as well as they could. So just a question on the accessibility of the training plan. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Jill? Or is it Terry?
So we're working really closely with public health to ensure that we get the right training out there, and quarterly the training plan goes out and it's open to anyone to go to that training. We've also been quite good in Angus in the past anyway. We open up all our suicide prevention training to everyone, so we've always had people coming along. We've had a lot of police officers, a lot of people from different organisations. We open up to family members too, because the wider that is, the better really for us.
Thanks very much. And I know I was speaking to some police officers the other day that they've been rolling out DBI training and have been finding it incredibly useful. Karen.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, and just for clarity, on page 101, in relation to the overall risk, the residual risk level and planned risk level, because the risk scoring is 3 and 3, and I'm not sure that that's correct.
Well spotted. I had that circled as well.
Rectify that. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks very much. Any more? Lewis?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Terry for the report, and in many ways it was like kind of entering into a new realm and a new world compared to the one before. So it is reassuring to know that you obviously are a key link within kind of the overall Tayside plan and locally what's happening. And I know even just from speaking to people within my community, there is lots of good work's been done and people are feeling supported. I guess my question is around kind of perhaps those more complex cases and kind of situations where maybe it is the whole family that are impacted. We know that in terms of children's mental health services, there definitely are really long wait times, and I think more so in comparison to kind of other neighbouring local authority areas. So I just wonder kind of what work has been done when it is perhaps that more kind of higher tariff specialist support that's been needed.
We work very closely with children and adults, CAMHS, children and adults, adolescent mental health, and we've got a really good transition protocol in place so that we do transition people across who need support, but that doesn't wholly answer your question about the whole family approach. Within Angus Mental Health and Wellbeing Network, it's all age groups, so we're working closely with children and families, and we're part of their planning groups to ensure that we can have a seamless support across all ages. We've also got one of our workers now working alongside children's services to provide support and advice when there's adult support and protection concerns as well. So we are working really well together. I don't know if there's much more I can say, but we are part of the planning for all age groups. We're not just sticking to adults.
Okay, thank you very much. You happy, Lewis? Yeah. Okay. Jill?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to add to that, if I may, in terms of the whole family approach, because sometimes what we see is that they're in different services. So it's how we work across the services as well to support, whether that be parental substance use that is impacting on children's mental health and wellbeing, that within our services across the partnership we're working very closely to make sure that that whole family approach isn't just within one service area, and we are working across.
Okay, thank you. Just before we go to the recommendations, I was invited to visit Lilybank Resource Centre in Forfar on Tuesday with the manager there, Doug Fairweather, and the service manager, Linda Kennedy. Had a fantastic couple of hours there, and I think there's an incredible amount of work going on there. You know, it's wholly people-centred, that is maybe not terribly visible. So we've been having a chat about how we rectify that, because it's such a valuable service under increasing demand. And it would be good to see something come forward to the IGB around that in due course. Right, thank you very much, everyone. If that's all the questions and comments, can I move to the recommendations as stated in the paper, recommendations 1 and 2. Everyone happy with those? Thank you very much indeed. And if we can then move to the finance report with Sandy Berry. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Although I will assume that everybody has had a chance to read this report, I am just going to go over a few key points, mainly because this is a year-end report and it's worthwhile reflecting on where we have been and also where we are going. So I'll cover briefly an update about the year-end position. I'll flag up some of the key issues that we're dealing with right now, which are all documented in the report. I'll mention briefly where we are with our strategic financial planning, and also pick up at the end a brief item about governance actions. So in terms of our year-end position, this is a year-end report. It builds on the report you received in April, but that wasn't, although that was after we had the year-end in terms of the calendar timeline, we were still using information that was up to February at that time. So this is a more up-to-date report. And sometimes we see a bit of volatility in our figures as we go from January, February through to the year end. Sometimes that can be due to the refinement of figures, and you can see that referenced once or twice in this report. And sometimes it's because we had additional information. And we have received additional information in terms of funding updates, and that's reflected again in the report. So at the year-end outturn, the IGB has reported an underspend of £7 million, which is significant and as a percentage of our turnover, and also is significant as a scale anyway. The reasons for that underspend are set out on page 123, section 3.11. There's a series of bullet points. You will be, I think, largely familiar with those bullet points. The key one, and we've spoken about this a number of times. Sorry, I think I said page 123 there. Just give me 2 seconds. I've got my page numbers mixed up. Sorry. Yeah, it is the bottom of page 123. Sorry, I was right the first time. I was looking at the top of page 123, which is not the right place to look at. Sorry. Yeah, so the key reasons for the underspends is set out at the bottom of page 123. And you'll be familiar with most of the factors in there. The key one has been throughout the year, and we flagged it on many times, issues associated with the vacancies. Those issues associated with vacancies affect our staffed services where we employ staff, but also, again, as referenced in the report, and we've spoken throughout the year, also reflect a significant level of unmet need in some of our social care services. And we estimate that the money end of that unmet need has probably been the equivalent of about £2 million that we might otherwise have spent if we'd been able to deliver care at the level that we were choosing to or planned to or had assessed as required. So, as I say, these themes are ones we've seen largely throughout the year, although one of the bullet points there does make reference to increased pay funding, which we didn't know when we last did a set of accounts. We have been able to use that underspend throughout the year, and right from October, early on in the financial year, we had projected there would be a significant underspend in the IGB, and we were working hard to apportion that and use it for various things that were consistent with our strategic plan, but also that would help our partners as well. And we have done that. We've reported that consistently to the IGB, and I think that flexibility has been useful for our partners, but is also going to be useful for us. And we've set that out on page 125 and 4. There are a series of bullet points there about things that we've done internally in the IGB supporting the strategic planning reserve, a mental health reserve that we set up only in our last meeting, and primary care reserves as well. So these things will all stand us in good stead as we move into increasingly challenging times going forward. It is possible we may have made more agreements with our partners, but we did these pretty difficult to kind of bottom out sometimes, and we were only able to make so much progress throughout the year. And again, in the report, you can see the reference that some of those discussions were ongoing right through to May. If they concluded quicker, we might have been able to move beyond where we went to, but we've got so far, and I think that's a good set of steps we've taken. All in all, these accounts are a set of management accounts. This morning's audit committee, we received a version of the unaudited IGB's accounts. That's a series of financial accounts. They are different to the management accounts, the main difference being a series of reserve adjustments, primarily, and again, as this committee will recognise or remember, big adjustments regarding reserves for the likes of COVID funding. And that's the main difference between the financial accounts that have gone to our auditors and the management accounts that we're reporting today. Just for information, the audit committee today also received the internal auditors' annual internal audit report. So that's on the web pages for the audit committee this morning, if anybody wants to look at it. That was generally a reasonable report. I think it was positively received by the audit committee, and in turn it's allowed us to draft an annual governance statement, which we will share with partner organisations. I know this has taken a wee bit of time. I do want to highlight some key issues in this report. There are significant overspends throughout the IGB already and financial challenges that we're dealing with. Many of these are set out in section 3 from about page 120. Without labelling these are issues associated with out of hours. We've seen that reference already in the action points. Issues associated with running costs of general practices, something that we've seen throughout our reports over a number of months. Challenges with prescribing, again, something that we've seen already in reports, but is also going to be referenced in the later report today. Issues about older people's services budgets. Again, it's been referenced and it's in the action points. And also issues regarding mental health and agreements we have with NHS side. There's a good paragraph in the paper setting out where we've got to and things that we still need to progress. So there's a lot going on that is all they're all difficult tasks in themselves, and we'll have to work together to work those through. And we'll feed back to the IGB as soon as we can about those issues. Just moving forward, I just want to kind of highlight a couple of issues because I'm going to speak about the financial plan very briefly. In the year that we've just concluded, you will be able to see a prescribing overspend of about £500,000. Our current projection for the year we are just starting is about a £2 million overspend on very early figures. That's a big turnaround, and it does partly reflect the fact that the prescribing position really did in the first half of last year and the second half of last year. We could see that move. So the ongoing effect of that is much more dramatic as we come into the new year. Now, it's something we have in a long time, so it's built into other numbers you've seen. And the other one I just want to kind of reference again is the out of hours position. So we have noted an overspend here. Last year completely covered by COVID reserves, which is as it should be because it was an issue that emanated through COVID. But the COVID reserves are now concluded, and you're having to manage this on our own and in conjunction with partners. So there are obvious things that will be very visible in terms of a change from last year to the year we're just starting. So looking forward, at section 3.14, we give you a very interim update between the financial plan you saw in April and an update that we will provide to the IGB in August. And we just note we have made. And Sally, who is on the call, I think, is continuing to work, Sally Wilson is continuing to work with all services to develop plans that are part of our strategic delivery plan that will feed into the strategic financial plan to take that forward. It is proving challenging, and we have only made so much progress so far, but we'll feed that back to the IGB at the next meeting. I do want to highlight section 3.14 because that has two important recommendations that come through at the beginning of the paper, and they are setting out ideas regarding looking at the level of collaboration we can have with other bodies, other parties, and also some thoughts regarding Scottish Government directives, particularly when they are not fully funded, which is increasingly the case. So we've shared some ideas, and the recommendations of the report are obviously that we're looking for IGB support to just evolve our thinking, if you like, regarding these things, and these are things that provided are supported on the recommendations we would then take forward. And the last item, Chair, I'd just like to highlight is on the very last page of the report, which is Appendix 3. We have, through these reports, over many months, flagged up issues associated with financial governance. And in this table on page 131, Appendix 3, the third grouping of information on this is describing an issue regarding corporate support services. This has been a long-standing issue that we've looked to develop. And what we have been, what has resulted from many discussions, but most recently at our executive management team in May, is the position that's described in the right-hand column of this paper. And to some extent, it does not represent an ideal way forward, but it does represent a pragmatic way forward, and one that we feel we live with. We have lived with this issue for many, well, effectively years. And I don't think it's necessarily something that can resolve itself without an inordinate amount of effort in many places. But the recommendation of our management team is that we effectively live with what we have right now, which will work because it has proved to work, but it does sometimes cause us some difficulties. But I think it's the most pragmatic way forward. Chair, I'm going to stop there. Sorry for taking so much time, but partly because it was a year-end report, I did feel I needed to just go through those 4 areas.
Thank you, Sandy. And I'm just thinking in terms of that section on page 131, it may be the most pragmatic to the deepening collaboration ambitions as well, actually contained within the blueprint for good governance, further deepening of the partnerships between local authorities, the health boards and the IGBs. So it would be good to get that ramped up a bit. I know Peter Davidson has heard me bad enough, as has Peter Drury. So I think that's about keeping pressure up in other fora as well. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions on that? I'm not seeing any. Peter Drury, I saw you go towards your little button there, Peter. Over to you.
Sharp, very sharp. Thank you, Chair. A note in the list of services on page 121 that we have a very significant underspend on podiatry, which I'm sure is due to great staff shortages. Because I know that in the private sector, there's a terrible shortage, which is reflected in rapidly rising charges. So there must be a lot of unmet need in this way, but what can we do to meet it?
Okay, is anyone in a position to come back on that?
Okay, yeah, probably not best placed to answer that immediately for you, but we will come back to you and we'll maybe share an update with board members more generally so everybody can see a response to that one. This is one of a number of lead partner services, as you can see in the tables there, and only today at the audit committee we were reflecting on, and obviously Peter, you were part of that discussion, we were reflecting on our continued need to improve the arrangements regarding information flow, assurances from us to other IJBs, but also from other IJBs to us. And I think, Peter, if those arrangements, maybe a mark of those arrangements improving would be people like myself who are not close to it being able to answer that more smoothly. So we'll come back to you on the specific point, but I think generally the issue, the type of issue you're flagging up will be clarified through our improved arrangements regarding lead partner services.
Thank you. I do wonder if podiatry is going the way of dentistry and just steadily going down in the NHS and up elsewhere. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Peter. And I see Chris Boyle there as well.
Thank you. Yeah, just one question really, just for Sandy, drawn down to the bottom of page 122, Sandy. You mentioned under adult services and Angus Council directed services about the note that the demand for care at home services continues to exceed the available capacity within the partnership. A couple of things really then. That's been an overriding theme for some time now with the recruitment issues within that particular sector. And to also flag up as well is that we did a really good piece of work, which some members of the IJB will be aware of, with the partnerships procurement team. And we had significant input through our ethical care charter into a recent tender for SDS option 3 for home and community-based services, where we were able to include in the tender things like providers avoiding the use of 0 hours contracts, availability of occupational sick pay, sufficient travel time between service user appointments, travel mileage paid in full as per the Inland Revenue current rates. So we've done that bit of work, but it's a theme that we're seeing all the time. So I'm wondering, Sandy, whether you've got any information or news on what recent efforts have been made or continue to be made to plug that shortfall between demand and capacity. capacity, because as I say, it's something we continually read about at each IJB that we come together.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I'll just initially start this, but I'll also pass over to Jill, and if anybody else wants to contribute, that would be okay as well. I think, Chris, I'll just make some comments about the national position, and this is not something that's unique to us. Through the forum that we have available to us, the channels we have available to us, we do obviously make as much reasonable representation in national forums to look for governance of this issue. And that would include things like funding inflation uplifts. A lot of the funding that we have available to us is linked to government decisions. And I think we've mentioned at this group before, although you're referencing here is regarding care at home, there are similar issues in care home services. And I think the likes of Nikki have commented on this before, and that's a challenge there. And again, through national forums, we are making representations where we can to see if the government could support increased funding to allow for potentially additional funding that would in turn support recruitment. But they're efforts that we're putting in on a national basis alongside other IJBs. I'll pass over to Jill, who can make some comments about where we are locally, Chris.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you, Chris. I think there has been a lot of work. I'm trying to put myself into Eunice's brain here if she was here to respond to this. So the work that she was leading up in terms of the recruitment and retention has had some success, and we have been able to appoint some additional staff as a result of that piece of work. We've also done some work around something that was actually raised at the last IJB around the level of unmet need in adaptions as a result of that. So we've got a bit more detailed work to do around that in terms of how we assess that actual level of unmet need to be able to identify what opportunities we may have for improvements. We've also had the impact of the implementation of the new framework that came into force in April this year. So there's a couple of things that we're just working through with that as well. There is an improvement plan in development around unmet need, and Eunice has got a session, I think, next Tuesday when she comes back from leave to progress that further. One of the things that we are really keen to be able to demonstrate is the impact of that unmet need in terms of how much it's impacting on other services, how much it's impacting potentially on admissions to hospital, how much it's impacting on delayed discharges, etc. So initial work that we just looked at yesterday, actually, it looks as though the unmet need is not having as a significant effect on admissions to hospital, which is actually really good. There's also a bit of work going on nationally around the definition of unmet need. So Angus appear to be recording unmet need in a slightly different way to other partnerships across Scotland. So in comparison to others, when we're looking at a different definition, it brings it down to about 900 hours, which is quite a significant difference. So that work is ongoing nationally in terms of how to define unmet need and how partnerships actually report it to get a bit of consistency across Scotland.
Thanks, Jill. I'm going to bring Nikki in there, and then Hayley wants to come in on Peter's podiatry point. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to put the point across in terms of recruitment across social care. I don't think we can ever get away from the fact that social care workers across the independent sector are one of the poorest paid, and I think at the moment £10.90. So I think until we see improvements with that, we're not going to see people choosing this career because you can get more work in a supermarket. I know that Scottish Care have been pressing Scottish Government for a minimum of £12 an hour, which I believe has been recognised, but Scottish Government are saying the time is not now. But I don't know, because obviously it's becoming a crisis point and we can't fill the positions that are right across the social care sector. So I just wanted to raise that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Hayley.
Thanks, Chair. It was just, as you said, it was just swinging back to Peter's point around the unmet need with podiatry, and it was really just to make the IGB aware that on the back of some of our social prescribing activity, there's been a third sector small community group that's been set up to deal with unmet need with podiatry, and one of the areas is a test of change, and what we'd look to do is roll that out. So that's been picked up by social prescribing in third sector.
Brilliant, thank you. That's encouraging. Good. Catherine Lindsay.
Thank you, Chair. I was just very pleased to hear of the work that's been undertaken to explore the possibility of standardising the recording and the interpretation of unmet need. I think getting a real understanding of the position across Angus and the benchmarking of that across other areas will help us to consider what else we need to do to improve. And I think that's particularly important given that I know that you and I and Councillor Speed and others were at the launch of the Carers Week the other week and heard directly from unpaid carers about the impact of that unmet need for them and for their loved ones. So I do think getting a greater understanding of that and the impact, personal impact as well as the system impact, is going to be really important for us going forward.
Thanks, Catherine. And 900 hours. Yeah. Lois, were you wanting to come in there?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just to kind of follow on from that, as Catherine said, I was going to touch on that in terms of the unmet needs. It may not be that there's an increase in hospital admissions. However, we know that there is definitely an impact in terms of the further pressures that's placing on unpaid carers. And really, I wanted to say actually, Sandy, it was actually really good to have your commentary on this report. I feel that has been missing a little bit. And I was thinking back to budget time, actually. I think you spoke more on this than you did at budget time within IGB and at council when we were agreeing the budget. So, yeah, just something to think of moving forward as we approach budget time again. But yeah, what I wanted to say was, or ask, was around the conversations that we're having, and I guess the kind of the vision and the help to live at home, I guess, strategy and message and conversations that will be had with families. Absolutely, I think it is important that we help people to live at home as long as possible, but equally it's crucial that people have their care needs met. And is that something that we maybe need to consider if we continue to have these kind of real workforce challenges across care at home in the community, as well as, I think it's been mentioned, care within a care home setting?
Gail?
Both comment to that, Councillor Speed. I have asked, Jill Galloway will be able to say to that, I have asked that when our new head of service, John Cooper, starts next week, that we prioritise unmet need and that we look at what's going on. As Jill said, that work's already started to look at how is it monitored, what is the situation, how do we measure that. So I have assured everybody that we will prioritise and do a much bigger look into exactly that, Lois, because you're absolutely right. We need to do a focused piece of work. So I can say, and again, I was at the carers event as well and heard that as well, as I do from many of you as well. So thank you.
Because, I'm of families who actually, it's the opposite. They feel that the time is right and that their loved one is, really at that stage where moving into a care home setting would be beneficial. Because they're perhaps quite lonely, quite isolated, and there's ongoing deterioration. And I guess it's crucial that, as we say, the right support at the right time.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Yes. Peter?
Sure. Thank you. I'm generally supportive of all the recommendations. I think before approving one in particular, I would just like some clarification if possible, Sandy. So exploring the increased level of collaboration with other partners, just from a governance piece, I suppose, how does that work? Is it within our gift to proactively contract somebody else to undertake a service, or does it go through procurement, just considering the need for any service that we outsource to have the capacity and the sustainability long term? And also, is it appropriate within this meeting to hint towards some of the frontline services that we are thinking about seeking support for? Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. So I don't think preconceptions about what this may come to. We have at the end of the bullet point here talked about potentially looking at frontline services, functions that directly support frontline services and other support service functions. There's subtle differences, but they're all, I suppose, somewhere on the continuum away from frontline services. But in terms of frontline services and collaboration, we have very recently, and in fact on today's papers, looked at things like the stroke pathway, which is a good example where we are now collaborating much more closely with Dundee, whereas previously we both had our own inpatient services. So I think there are things like that that don't necessarily involve, need to involve the likes of procurement, but are things that might feel like a natural response for everybody in terms of remodelling services. And, we mentioned earlier on today in one or two of the questions about lead partner services. They are essentially largely services that we're already collaborating with. The reference to podiatry was one, out-of-hours service that we talked about another. These are services we're already collaborating, so there may be more services where we can have a natural level of collaboration where your services are provided in a different way. So I think that's probably how I would envisage it, but we haven't got preconceived ideas, but of course it doesn't have to be frontline, it could be other things beyond frontline.
Thank you. That is very much understanding of that aspiration rather than external. Thank you. Anyone else have anything for Sandy? I think the questions, Sandy, really demonstrate how important your understanding of the services are when you're working on the financial part of it, because all the questions have really been about those services and unmet need, and it's the impact on the budget is really vivid. So thanks very much. So can I take us back to the recommendations? And there's 5 recommendations there. Are we happy to approve all of those? Lovely. Thank you very much. That's marvellous. And if we can go then on to the GP practice premises strategy, and I think it would be helpful to have a narrative around that. We're going to you first, Jill. Yep. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. And if it's okay, if I could just ask Lisa to come up. Again, really pleased to kind of feels like it's been a long time in coming and bringing this report forward, and I think it reflects a lot of the work that's been happening coming out of the pandemic as well. So these things have kind of been on the cards, I think, for a long time, and we're beginning to see quite a number of things coming to fruition. So I think first off I have to thank Lisa and Victoria for the work that she's put into that, along with Dr Clements, to pull together the GP practice premises strategy. I think just what we were aiming to do is provide a direction of travel across Angus in terms of GP premises and what that could look like going forward to ensure that we meet the needs of the population. We've already touched on some of the challenges around primary care workforce, and some of the sustainability issues on premises is part of that. Property is one of the functions that remains with NHS Tayside. So there has been, I think, very pleased to say, greater collaboration with NHS Tayside, with all 3 partnerships actually, in terms of pulling together and developing the premises strategy. Lisa, is there anything that you would want to particularly highlight?
Purpose buildings in order to deliver the healthcare that we need for our population is essential, and I think the document sets out our vision around that and what is required, and it breaks it down into looking at what we currently have, where we want to be, and how we might get there. And within that, we have a framework and guiding principles. And if I could just draw your attention to a few of those that we mentioned around the requirement to have the accelerated lease programme to support practices and GPs who own their buildings currently. We know that premises has a massive impact upon the ability to recruit and sustainability. So it's really important in order to have a sustainable and robust service. We do focus on a vision where we look to transition to a model whereby in our 7 large towns, we envisage a future state where it will be more common to have practices working together on a single site not necessarily a single practice, but to be working co-located with large multidisciplinary teams around them. That's the reality of the sustainability issues that we have and what will be required for the future. If we do that and we do it successfully, I think that we will be in a strong place to ensure that we do recruit and attract GPs into the local area, which can only be for the good of our population. So really that's what the document sets out. It's kind of a roadmap for how we might get that. There's some very detailed information in the document around, you know, where we are currently, what we need to do to progress some of that. It's an enabling strategy. I think it should be seen as part of a wider premises strategy, and I know that there is work ongoing within the partnership around that. It's also part of the emerging primary care strategy. In terms of consultation and engagement, we have worked very closely with not just our partner health and social care partnerships and NHS Tayside, but also with our practices and the patients within those practices. I think it is worth noting, though, that obviously some of the changes that we describe here will happen organically. They will happen over a period of time. And at those points, there will be an opportunity to have further engagement and consultation. It's impossible to do that kind of in advance of, you know, certain situations arising. But I think it is important to note that that has to be an ongoing and continuous dialogue that we have with the community as well. They're just the main points.
Thank you very much. And Lewis. Mike, Lewis. No.
It's just like there's too much to do. Right, thank you. Yeah, thanks very much for that. I think absolutely it would be great if we could attract more GPs to Angus, and why not? Angus is just such a beautiful place to be. In terms of the report and accessibility, there really is just kind of one bullet point in there in terms of ensuring that primary care services operate from a planned network of accessible buildings, which absolutely couldn't, you know, disagree with. However, accessibility really is so much more in terms of the importance of being able to access and make that appointment, and also transport in terms of getting there. And then once you reach your building, how you then navigate. And I know from experience and from speaking to others within the community that sometimes the GP practice is quite difficult to navigate, especially if you do have a mobility need, or are a wheelchair user, or perhaps are visually impaired, or have a hearing problem and things in terms of how you make that appointment. I just wondered if there could be kind of perhaps more added into that moving forward, around the accessibility part of this piece of work.
Microphone, please, Lisa.
The points you raise are very important points. Accessibility, particularly in relation to where buildings are located and how people get to them, and the ease of that, particularly as we know that we have an elderly and an increasingly older population. And that's really what I meant when I said about, you know, as we look at some of these projects going forward, and we look at kind of how we design buildings and where they're located, these are the things that will have to be considered at that point. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind. In terms of accessibility, I totally also agree that it's not just about the physical location, it's also about how people access services, how they make that first step into practices. And I think we do have to recognise that, you know, in the future it probably will be a more blended model that we have as well, and that we need to cater for all of our communities in that. But as I say, I think that's work that will be ongoing as part of this. It's impossible to document all of that, but I think it is important to acknowledge it and reference that, you know, as we do look at this, that is part of our vision and strategy.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'll be quick. Yeah, so just very quickly, a couple of examples would be that, you know, newly installed kind of signing in stations, you know, where patients key in their details and their date of birth, and then that logs them into the building. They're not at wheelchair height. And also in terms of aids and adaptations as well within the building, in terms of toilet facilities, you know, I'm not aware of any practice having a change in place facility, or even indeed the kind of aids and adaptations to help someone transfer out for a physical examination. Those type of things being really crucial to someone who needs that kind of face-to-face patient support. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Lois. And Alison's wanting to come in, and maybe Alison could answer this for me as well. Have Near Me kept up post-COVID? Are we making enough of that? Has it tailed away? Thanks.
Okay, so first of all, acknowledging the difficulties with access to buildings and that our buildings should be accessible to all, absolutely, and that we've got some older buildings, and it's how we and some of the restrictions placed by the new legislative requirements are costly, let's be honest. So it's how do we get the balance between trying to meet everybody's needs and with new premises and ensure all our premises are fit for purpose. But for me, the question is, how do we make our services accessible rather than how do we make our buildings, people try and fit in with our buildings? And so sometimes it might be that we are accessible by the use of remote technology. I'll come on to Near Me. It might be because we have community teams, and it's not for me about putting services into traditional service boundaries. It's about how do we get the services that meet the needs of a frailer population, people living in the community with additional needs, perhaps thinking more around people that find difficulty accessing services because of mental health issues. And I would like to, an example would be, instead of thinking of district nursing as a service for people who are housebound, we need to look at what skills the district nursing service and how can people access this. Because people might be village bound, but they might not be housebound, and how do we support that? So I think we should be brave. I think we need to recognise this has to be sustainable, and that all the financial pressures and the workforce pressures, so we do need to be brave, but we also need to be innovative and think as to what is our population needing and go for that, rather than look at what we've had. We need to look at what we actually do need for the future, and some of that will be difficult in terms of hard decisions. Going to Near Me, that's part of a bit of work that several GP practices are doing around access to GP appointments and making sure that there's a range of appointments, again, suitable to meet people's needs. Near Me has fallen off. I don't have the exact figures, but we can look into that for you. But it's very variable, and it has fallen off partly because GP practices find it difficult to offer Near Me in addition to all the other options when they're under pressure, but also because it isn't necessarily a choice that people want to make if they can get a GP appointment face-to-face. But that is part of the urgent care work, to look at the different accessibility. It's part of how do people have access to a GP, and electronic communication in terms of eConnect would be another option that we're utilising very successfully in our 2C practice up in Brecon.
Super, thank you very much, Alison. And Elaine Henry online, please.
Thanks, and I think just to echo colleagues, it's absolutely right that we're getting back to I suppose one question is about the, we've described the risk, but do we know the time plan of that risk? I'm just conscious that GPs, like a lot of the medical workforce, are ageing, and I'm conscious too that there may be risks that a practice has a particular model, it's a partnership model rather than salaried. So do we have sort of timelines along the risk, perhaps, of people coming to retirement age or leases being up on buildings, about kind of points that may become very critical? Because I'm just probably reflective that we've had practices where we've come to almost a crisis, and just really to understand if it's possible to plot out some of that work as we go ahead, and probably also describing the risk if the direction that we're giving to NHS Tayside, if there's within the time frame that we wish, how do we describe that risk? So we're asking a different body to do something, but we're holding the risk because we know what needs to be done. So it's probably just, again, as we come out of the pandemic, how we are better at and actually managing it, rather than thinking, well, that's the risk, that's it, that's what it's going to be, because risk is dynamic, it will change. And an amber risk for 6 months to 2 years can become a red risk. So it's really about how we use documents like this, and we have that dynamic relationship with the risk that we're describing and holding.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. I'm going to bring Alison back in, and I know David Shaw has got his hand up online as well. Thanks.
Okay, I'll maybe let David come in and be more expand on this, but we have a practice sustainability report recently completed across all Tayside practices. We encourage GPs to share the information. They are independent contractors, so the information they share is in confidence. It's very business sensitive, so I wouldn't be able to share down to individual practices as to their circumstances, but we are aware, Lisa and I and others are aware, and we do absolutely look at supporting our most at-need practices. We can identify those practices who have older GPs, less GPs per head of practice population, and where the premises is a particular concern. So we do look at all these factors. We also have our health and social care experience survey, which allows us to triangulate some of that data, and we also have our own knowledge of our services on the ground as to what's happening, our informal networks that we do have in Angus. So we do look at this information and act on it where we can, and that's where the Primary Care Improvement Fund and other aspects that we're discussing around our strategic planning come into play, but we wouldn't be able to share risks in individual practices at this level.
I appreciate that, Alison. Thank you. David.
Thanks. Just really building on what Alison has been saying, it is important that we do get a heads up where practices are experiencing difficulties, and it's important that we are aware where there are a group of practices that are experiencing difficulties that are located in a particular area. And the risk work Alison's referred to, the sustainability survey, is something for which we are intending to repeat at intervals so that we can get a trajectory to that risk. As Alison states, it's granular in the nature that it does report on various different metrics, such as the age profile, whether or not there are vacancies in a particular practice, whether there are difficulties in recruitment, whether there are problems in accessing locum support, and to what extent the practice relies on those sorts of things. There's a specific element that relates to premises risks as well. The risks of premises are that if you cannot find a GP to replace you when you retire, that you may still be liable for a 6 or 7 figure sum of money, and that can discourage that GP from replacing you because they don't wish to assume that risk. So the flexibilities that the 2018 contract brought were to try and bring some of these risks out of general practice. I do think we've made a significant amount of progress on perhaps getting closer to grips with where we need to make changes with premises. I think there's more work to be done, both at partnership level and at NHS Tayside level, to make sure that we move from the risks we know to the solutions that we now need to follow through with. I think that's it for me.
Thanks, David. Now, Jill was indicating to come in, and Richard's online, so I'll take Jill first. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I think, David, your final point there was one of the things I was going to say, because one of the key things for us is when we identify that a practice is at risk, what can we do to support that? So there's a lot of work been happening around what are the key actions that we need to take as a partnership to be able to support GP practices should they identify any risks or concerns. And I think there is still work to be done on that, but that is an area of priority for us.
Thank you very much. Richard.
Just first point, just comment on near me. I think certainly in our area, the patients prefer, now that they've seen more patients face to face, they don't particularly want near me. It is kind of clunky to use from a GP point of view because we've got to log into our own system as well, and you're kind of flicking between screens all the time. But the patients just don't seem to want it anymore. There's very few that want it. More of them rather coming face to face. It has its limitations, obviously, depends on their camera at the other end for things like skin things, but it's a lot of patients have rather face to face. So certainly our numbers have gone down, not that they're ever particularly high. In terms of the premises, I mean, as David and Alison alluded to, I mean, traditionally, the GP premises are aging, and we're now in a situation where newer GPs come in, don't want to buy into premises, don't want to build new premises. So that's part of the reason why the stuff was started in the new contract. The plan was every kind of 5 years that obviously the GPs that obviously own premises, the boards would gradually buy out obviously all the premises over 25 years, and eventually the boards would own everything. But that's been partly because of COVID, but also just because of finances and lots of legal problems. That has been painfully slow across the whole of Scotland, not just Tayside. And lease transfers have been mad in lots of legal work. So I think we're way behind. But traditionally, not enough's been put into premises. I mean, it's not necessarily all the health board's fault. I mean, the health board have been responsible for the premises, but there's not enough funding in total. I mean, very little has been earmarked traditionally for like GP premises, considering the amount of work that's gone into them, and also the MDTs now got more and more attached staff. If you want to have things, obviously in the community, buildings got to be bigger. But yeah, so it needs a bit of investment. But I think with the strategy and with now cooperation with the premises between the three IGABs, trying to actually have a coordinated approach to the board and things for premises, I think that's what's needed, because the HSCP's IGABs don't have enough experience in dealing with premises on their own, and obviously I don't think can actually own the premises themselves. So it's been a slow process, but I think hopefully in the future things will get there. But obviously it is a big risk, because it is a lot. Most new GPs coming in don't want to take on the risk of partnerships, and there's been a lot of problems in the past with not every practice is owned by all GPs. Some are only like one GP owns them, and that causes lots of problems with all the lease transfers and the premises transfers. So it's a bit complicated. So.
Richard, thank you. I think you've articulated really well the situation, and also the importance of the direction that we've got attached to this paper. So unless there's any more questions, can we move to the recommendations? And the direction is articulated more fully on page 200. Can we approve all those recommendations, including that direction to NHS Tayside? I'm not seeing any dissent. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, just absolutely taking in all the comments and agree in terms of what's been said, but also just in terms of our duties and our needs in terms under the Equalities Act. In terms of the quality impact assessment, it does just kind of highlight everything being a positive. And I just wondered, given that I'd highlighted a number of things under accessibility in terms of, the buildings and future sustainability, whether more needs need to be identified, if that's something you will take away.
I'll bring in Jill there.
Yeah, that is absolutely something we'll take away, Councillor Speed. And I think one of the pieces of work that we're doing as part of the Equalities mainstreaming it is a new template for EQIA and how we actually conduct the EQIA. So they will be different coming back to future IJBs. And for individual pieces of work around the strategy, there will be a fuller EQIA that's done as part of that, and that will pick up on a number of the points that you raised.
Yep, thanks.
Gail, do you want to come in there?
Yes, I think you raise a very valid point. I looked at that as well and thought, what are the other implications? So we will take note of that as well. It was just to say as well, you've drawn attention to the proposals that are contained within the report today and the guiding principles. But I think, as Richard was saying, I think we need all of your support to commit to facilitating the development of premises that are designed for the future. You know, the future is around this interdisciplinary team, and they're much more complex patients. So I really commend the strategy to all of you around that. And Lisa, I want to thank yourself and Victoria, because it was actually a really helpful and enjoyable read the way it was printed out as well. So very helpful. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's and when you look at all the other elements of primary care strategy and developments, it's an enormously complex picture. So thank you. And some of the timings will be different in terms of the papers coming forward, but that is to allow progress rather than waiting for everything to be ready at the same time. I think that's really important. Right, thank you very much. You've already approved those recommendations. Thanks very much. And if you just want to stay seated, if we can move on to the Primary Care Improvement Plan, which is item number 11. Thank you.
I'm just going to hand straight over to Lisa, if that's okay, Chair. So this is our regular report that comes back to the IJB just to update on the progress around the Primary Care Improvement Plan. We have included the Primary Care Improvement Fund in this paper. Previously, we have brought two separate papers, but we have combined them into one for this year. Lisa?
Thank you. Yes, so thank you. So as Jill says there, this paper does focus on the Primary Care Improvement Fund as well as the Primary Care Improvement Plan itself. As you will know from previous reports, the new GP contract sets out the 6 areas of services that we have to achieve actions upon, and there was a further revision with MOU 2 in 2021, which really focuses our attention on pharmacotherapy, VTP and community care and treatment services. So focusing on those 3 areas, VTP is essentially compliant in all areas. It's delivered by a central team. We have had much more challenge around achieving pharmacotherapy, not just ourselves. In Angus, it's a Tayside problem, it's a national problem, and that largely relates to workforce challenges. CTAC is partially compliant. We have had some changes recently with the model that we had in place, which we are working through. However, the issue around CTAC services is that they are all in place, but obviously GPs do also continue to do a number of those tasks, so not everything has transferred across there. The new GMS contract does make provision for if there's a failure to deliver on the areas, transitional payments may come in. As far as we're aware, these aren't planned for this year. However, that is something that we have to be mindful about for the future. So this paper sets out context of what we've delivered in terms of the plan, our areas where more work is required or where we haven't managed to achieve everything as set out in the contract ask. And it also details the financial position for 22-23 and also looks forward to what our plans are for 23-24. I think the significant things to highlight in that is that, because of slippage, because of the challenges we've had around recruitment, we did build up a slippage in plans that's been reported previously. The most important thing for us going forward is the ability to have the ease to be able to put plans in place to look to remedy that and to spend some of those monies when we see that occurring, which is why we're asking for delegated authority via the Chief Operating Officer to do that. The government changed the guidance in September last year around any slippage was to be used against the funding for subsequent years. Therefore, we did lose some of that money because it got offset against our current plans. So the main thing for us this year is to really make sure that we utilise our funding to its highest potential and we don't lose that opportunity. And we're currently working on some plans to enable us to do that. As I say, pharmacotherapy is the area where there is potentially the most risk because there just simply aren't the pharmacists out there in the whole of the UK, really. Actually, it's a national position. I was quite surprised recently to hear that, the extent of the shortages they have in pharmacy. But there are areas that we can spend money on, and I think that, we do need to be able to adapt to do so, albeit it is a question of balance because we do have to balance out the risk around potential for transitionary payments in the future as well.
Lisa, thank you. I've got Peter Davidson.
Thank you for the papers, but also the narrative around it, really helpful. Generally supportive of the direction and the direction of travel and work. My question is more around the the budget. Obviously, brief reference was made to the Scottish Government providing a direction but not fully funding it. Are we confident that this particular direction is fully funded? And if the NHS Finance were here, would the board would they be in agreement that that this is affordable with the budget allocated to it? Thank you.
Question.
So I may let Sandy come in there, but I mean, we do have assurances from the government that they are not reducing the money that they have previously allocated to PSIP. So the 170 million that is allocated, they've provided assurances around. However, I think that we do have to be mindful of the financial climate that we operate in, and I think Sandy's probably better placed to talk in more detail around that.
Okay, thank you. I think, Peter, the answer is no. Simple as that. So this is a funding stream that's so significant. I'm trying to think of the right word now, but anyway, this is one of the funding streams where the government withdrew significant level of reserves. We've seen that in financial reports at the start of, well, about this time last year. We saw about £2.5 million of reserves withdrawn from this area, and we spoke about that last summer. I think, again, in terms of what Lisa said, that the government have guaranteed that the existing funding stream of £170 million is going to be there. It tells two stories. One, that the £170 million will be there. Two, that they have not guaranteed an inflation uplift on it. Inflation uplifts are running at 3%, 4%, 5%, probably at a minimum at the moment, and they have not been properly funded, and we haven't had early guarantee of that, clear guarantee of that. So that is another significant concern. So I think, because of what happened last year, we would need to be wary. There's also a track record of uplifts not happening on this funding over a number of years, and that includes not just inflation uplifts, but also uplifts to deal with pension changes that have happened through the lifetime of this programme. So the funding that we're seeing now is nothing like what was envisaged in 2018 when this programme started. So I don't think we have a high level of confidence, but we have had slippage. We aren't quite where we need to be yet. So that's not an immediate financial problem for us. It's more one for the point where we get to the end point of implementation. So it's still a wee bit off. That doesn't make it any easier when it gets there, but it's not an immediate problem for us. But other people will get there, and I think we don't have confidence.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Alison. Mike, Alison.
I think it's important to acknowledge we've just discussed about the primary care sustainability survey and the individual practices and the need to be flexible and respond in a timely manner. And I'm supportive of the paper, and I think in future we need to make sure that we have the flexibility in Angus to respond quickly to where we need the resources to be for individual practices, and anything that we can do to make sure that we effectively move money around the system. And it's not, and it's the way that the contract's been set up. We've got the GP sub and the NHS Tayside and Health and Social Care Partnership all have to approve the funding, and we're delegating it to the group to try and make it happen really effectively and efficiently. But there is a danger for me that we're not being flexible, we're getting caught up in meetings and not able to get the money to where it's needed. I'm particularly keen that we have the flexibility to move funding from areas of work that we're not able to recruit to, such as pharmacotherapy, much as we want to keep the plans around pharmacists, absolutely. How can we move that flexibly to urgent care for nursing, where we are perhaps able to recruit, especially as we are a developing workforce and over-recruiting because we have to train people. So for me, in the future, this is just the funding for 23-24, but I think we need to have a real consideration. The amount of work that goes into primary care sustainability in the partnership for our responsibility is much more than 4 pages, worth. And I just wonder whether we need to get a bit more sophisticated for next time. This is work in progress. As David said, we've described the risk. I think for next time we need to describe how we're being very flexible and responsive. And we've got the quality improvement approach. We've not decided this is what we're having, and we're working on it. We are constantly evolving and improving as we change our model of care, particularly around urgent care, which I think is the right thing to do. And I think we just need to have a bit of a think about the future around having some flexibility in Angus to quickly respond. Thanks.
Thank you, Alison. On the back of that, given the direction states that it will be monitored and progress reported to the Audit Committee biannually, do we have a mechanism to flag up any exceptions that allow that response? Thanks.
I think, Chair, one of the things that Sandy and I are working on is how we can bring assurance reports from Audit Committee and other groups, and that's something that would be included in an Audit Committee assurance report that would be coming to every IGB going forward.
That's great. Thank you very much for answering that question. Great. Any more questions? Who have we got? Richard. Well done. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with echoing what Sandy said. I mean, yeah, I don't think you can take anything as a given because, like the money was withdrawn this year. Money that hadn't been spent was basically clawed back this year by the government. Places that had managed to spend it on the contract obviously were able to keep it. So there was all sorts of discussions about health inequalities and things, because obviously the places that had already managed to recruit, often in the central belt because it's easier to recruit there, and there was more universities for pharmacy schools and things available to, and people wanted to stay locally. They might got to keep the money, but if they hadn't spent it, it was clawed back. And obviously in terms of uplifts and things, nothing much has been forthcoming. So I don't think anything's guaranteed. But I think, yeah, as Alison said, I think you have to be flexible in terms of getting it spent, because if it doesn't get spent, it's likely to get clawed back again, especially in the current financial climate. So I think we have to be fairly kind of light of foot. But yeah, last year they did a kind of grab raid of any money that wasn't spent. So I would, and a lot of that had been earmarked. It was money that was like allocated for recruiting pharmacists, recruiting staff, but the staff couldn't get there. That was taken back. So I think the moral of the story is if you got it, spend it on something that can be approved for the contract. Otherwise, it might get clawed back. So
yeah, spend wisely. Right, thank you, Richard. Right, can we then move to approving this paper and the recommendations 1 to 4, please? Thank you very much indeed. And the next paper is the Angus and Dundee stroke. Thank you very much, Lisa and Jill. The Stroke Rehabilitation Pathway Review. Can I ask Morag Hambleton to come down and sit at the end of the table, please? It's lovely to see you, Morag. Thank you. There. So I think people would be really keen to hear from you before we take some questions and comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. So really, as you're aware, we've brought this paper to IGB previously and had intended coming in February with an update, and we're here today. That's partly been due to the changing circumstances that have occurred around stroke incidence rates that's highlighted within the paper. Just a number to note, 5 years ago we sat with around 700 strokes per year within Tayside, and for the first time last year in 2022 that number was over 1,000. There is ongoing monitoring of that activity, but to kind of gain a clearer understanding about the trajectory and what that may look like moving forward, those numbers are available in the links within the paper if you want to kind of take a deeper dive into that. That is in part, mainly in part, the reason where we're not quite where we expected to be. The anticipation was that we would look to reduce the inpatient bed base to support community developments within rehabilitation, and without being able to reduce that inpatient bed base due to those numbers, that has been very challenging in trying to determine how we find a way to move forward. So we've brought this paper today with a view to acknowledging the work that we've done to date, and what we are aiming to do as part of a bigger piece of work is to look at the stroke and neuro rehab numbers with a view to developing community services within that remit. We don't want to focus our attention purely on stroke patients, but we want them very much to be part of this. So there has been a lot of positives in the work that we've done to date. We have developed a small stroke-specific community rehab team for Angus, and the intention moving forward would be to look at developing that further to be able to expand on that service. There are, as you will see in the paper, some financial implications that are highlighted in terms of how we manage our EHP services moving forward, but the direction of travel is still very much the same. It's more a question of some further work to be done in how we get there, but that will be picked up within a wider review of that specific work around the delivery of those community-based services.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Morag at the moment? Oh, David.
Thank you, Chair. I've been new to this group. I'm not entirely up to speed with all the history, but I did go back to the October report. Can I, just for my clarification, ask a number of things? One is the development of this pathway. I don't know whether I'm looking for something that's not there. Is it as simple as the infograph that was attached to the previous report, i.e. people are just coming straight out of the acute unit and going home and being supported on that basis? There's nothing more complicated than that. And before you can just, I'll answer them, give you all at once, and then you can come in.
Your mic's gone off, Dave.
Oh, sorry. The second part was, is this team a virtual team, or are they co-located and operating as a singular unit? And the final aspect is that if people are being discharged at an earlier stage in the recovery from acute care, has the social care aspect of that been factored in? Because all the references here are to the dedicated AHP support. Because clearly the sort of care aspects would be something I would have some concerns about if that's not the case, if we haven't factored in a resource there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just go through the query order that they came. The infographic does outline the overall position. It's a very kind of high-level overview, if you like. There is a lot more detail that sits within that, but we wanted to create something as a visual that would describe the pathway. The focus of that pathway is about individuals receiving care where they need it. So there will be people that will perhaps be discharged from the acute unit directly in Nine Wells to home. There will also be people that will go via the inpatient units, the inpatient unit at Royal Victoria, and then go home. And it's very much dependent on the requirements of that individual and their personal circumstances. One of the things that we've been able to do through the work that we've done to date is allow people to be treated in their own home or close to home. Previous to this, we never had a community-based stroke-specific rehab team. They are a physical team. They work. Some of the work is done remotely. So, for example, within speech and language therapy, some of those interventions can happen via Near Me. Speech and language therapy is a team that use Near Me quite considerably for those that don't have high-level communication difficulties, but that can be deployed when it's suitable and when it's required. The team are co-located together and work together as a community multidisciplinary team, so that involves input from nutrition and dietetics, physiotherapy, occupational therapy and speech and language therapy. We have been hearing now of family situations where patients have previously and historically would have gone through that inpatient rehab unit, perhaps at the unit at Stracathro, and been there for a significant amount of time and then gone home, but they would have gone home to no community or very little community rehab, no stroke-specific community rehab. It would just have been the generic community teams, but these people are now being able to be discharged directly home because of the facility to be able to treat them at home or closer to home. We will also bring patients into closer rehab units, maybe at Stracathro or in Whitehills or in Arbroath Infirmary, where there are outpatient rehab spaces and they can come in, but they get to sleep in their own bed at night, and the benefits of all of that and having their family around them are beneficial. In answer just to your query about around the social care components, it is something that we have been very aware of. And as we move into this next phase of developing more community services, we fully understand there is a need to look at that much wider than just the AHP service provision. We have linked in with our nursing colleagues to understand their position. But wider than that, the kind of social and home care aspects absolutely need to be addressed. If somebody is identified as needing those services, then there's a multidisciplinary discussion to support that discharge out, and we wouldn't be putting anybody home. Nobody would be going home that required something that couldn't be provided.
Thank you for that. You appreciate my concern, given the earlier figures we were being given about unmet need, and that falling on families if there is a pressure, as there undoubtedly is about discharge. Is there any agreement about where the responsibility for this pressure is going to be held in the process? In as much as there's pressure, obviously, on the acute beds, the rehab beds, and on your team in the community. Thank you.
Sorry. Absolutely, we're linking in very closely with the teams within RVH. We know that there's a wider pressure on the system in terms of the capacity and flow of patients through the units that are there. So we're working very hard to be able to pull people through that system based on their needs and requirements rather than push people through. We don't want anybody to be going home that doesn't have the support around them that is required. So depending on each individual and each individual's family and home circumstance, that level of unmet need may sit in slightly different places, but we are working very closely with the teams to communicate about who we can pull through, who we can pull home to make sure that we're supporting that capacity and flow. But as is identified in the paper, there is a need to understand how we can build on that community resource to be able to support that capacity and flow further, to reduce that.
Thank you. I have a wee question, if you don't mind. In terms of further work to merger the neuro and stroke pathways, is that addressing any workforce challenges by merging the teams? Or do we have enough of those skilled AHPs to meet the demand? Thanks.
I think it's the workforce challenges that we've discussed, or that have been tabled already today, are there. It's about the availability of that workforce. There are quite a high level of skill set of clinicians who have an interest in this area of work within neuro and within stroke rehabilitation. We have a lot of involvement in neuro within our mainstream services as well. So I think that there will always be challenges in how we manage that, but we've been very clear in looking at merging this work and picking up the work that's being done through the urgent and unscheduled care collaborative, that workforce is a big part of that, and that will have to be addressed in terms of how we manage moving forwards.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else have any questions? Alison.
Thank you, Morag, and I'm very supportive of the clinical model. You know that. Just a question around the risk to AHP services in general and how we distribute our AHP workforce across the system, because it's saying that total local AHP resources will be reprioritised to meet this need. That's at the bottom of 210, and that is because we have not been able to shift the resource from the stroke beds out because there's an increase in strokes, and that's a national issue, which maybe I wouldn't want to speculate on the cause, but it could be because of a lack of prevention and proactive care with blood pressure and all sorts. So there's a big concern for me. But then when we go to our performance report, we can see that we're reducing bed days. And so is it the right place to stretch an already AHP struggling workforce to meet demand, frankly, in the community with all these elderly people, particularly when you see in our performance report around the increase in falls and the key role that AHPs have in supporting people who are at risk of falls. And for me, there's maybe a conversation when we get to performance report and thinking around our strategic plan around bed days, because we are reducing our bed days overall, albeit with bigger proportion of stroke, and the clinical model's right here. But I do have a concern with this, that we're expecting the HP resource to manage more and more, and is that the right place strategically? Thank you.
Thanks, thanks, Alison. It's always going to be a challenge, and I will always be an advocate for for developing within AHP services. We are linking in very closely. This isn't a team that is working in complete isolation. We're working really hard not to compromise the delivery of the other services for one or the other. We're looking very closely at how this team function and how they will function moving forward. We are very fortunate in terms of available workforce that, as I said, there's a lot of people interested in coming to work in this area, and we actually found when we've been advertising our mainstream jobs, they're actually much harder to fill than ones that have a focus around neuro and stroke delivery. But the pressure is sitting within us at the minute because we haven't been able to release that resource. And I would be more than happy to pick up a conversation about how we can, how we can manage that, moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.
Hi, Maurice. Just to take you right back to your initial comments, you said that their strokes incidence had gone up from, I think it's 700 to 1,000. Just a general question. Do you know which age groups those increases are spread across? Is it particularly older people, or is it young, or is it across the board? And do you have any idea how these have occurred? And obviously it links into the prevention and proactive care agenda. It really is obviously a place to solve that problem, I think, if that makes sense.
I pressed too soon, sorry, before you'd finished. I can't give you those numbers off the top of my head around the age, but the links within the paper, and I can go and find out and come back to you directly, but the links within the paper take you to the studies that articulate that. There has been lots of conversation about the impact of COVID and the change in that kind of early intervention and prevention, the monitoring, as Alison has indicated, of blood pressure, of AF, has that been a contributing factor? And there's a lot of work that we have identified that we know that we can do to try and look at preventing the rate of strokes. So there's a huge amount of work to do as part of the development of this. And again, it's about, for us within AHP services, we've been talking a lot recently about prioritising prevention, because it's something that we feel like, well, we'll get there, and we're focused on the here and now, but we're looking to try and focus on that. But I think this conversation is a much wider conversation amongst our GP colleagues and wider still, to try and look at how we look at identifying that rate. So I'm sorry I can't answer your question off the top of my head, but there is a significant increase, but we're closely looking at that as to see whether or not that's going to be sustained, or whether it may well begin to reduce a little more.
Thank you very much. And I think Public Health Scotland is also collecting data on that at the moment anyway. Okay, I have one additional query actually in terms of the recommendations. I think the IGB would be really keen to have an update on the progress of this, and I just wondered what sort of timescale you felt would be reasonable, Morag, that we could maybe add into the recommendations for reporting back.
I wonder whether the work has just begun in terms of the merging into that work, but a lot of the focus at the minute for that pathway work is around that inpatient activity and that capacity and flow. So in terms of how that could potentially translate and how we move forward, we will still begin to look at the community component. I don't know whether, my gut reaction was to say 12 months, but I don't know whether that's too long for you and whether 6 months would be better. I don't know that any sooner than 6 months would maybe bring too much more.
My gut was 12 months as well, to be honest, but it would be just good to have it in our forward thinking. Is everyone happy with that? Yes, Gail?
Yeah, I would agree. I think Morag, we've been very ambitious over the time, and you can see in our action point, we've delayed bringing the report back and delayed, and we were caught out by way of numbers, etc. So I wouldn't want to give you an unrealistic timescale, but again, we end up in red, Chair. Yep.
Right, so if you're okay with that, then we can add that in terms of the recommendations, that we have an update in a year's time. That'd be super fantastic. Thank you very much. Can I ask everyone else, are you all happy with the recommendations as they are with that minor amendment? Lovely. Thank you very much. I'm going to suggest that we have a 5-minute comfort break. Given it's so warm, please hydrate. I'll see you at 4 o'clock. If we could pause the recording, please. Thanks.
No water.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome back. And just before we start back on the agenda again, could I ask everyone to stay in the meeting after we stop recording at the close of the agenda, please? There's just a couple of wee things I want to cover off. Thank you very much. And that takes us on to agenda item number 13, please, which is the Clinical Care and Professional Governance Annual Report. And I'm just thinking that Alison maybe want to introduce this for us. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So you have the annual assurance report from the Clinical Care and Professional Governance group within Angus Health and Social Care Partnership, which covers all of our services and has wide representation. I'm pleased to report that there's good engagement with the group, and attendance is good, and we have a wide range of activities, and it's good to see the range of activities going from strength to strength, and also that we have got good engagement within our services, clinical care and professional governance groups, which are always improving as well, although there's always room for improvements. I won't reiterate what is in the report, but thanks to Abigail for a comprehensive report. I would just like to highlight under the proposal section, which is section 4 there, that we are continuing to evolve and at our future risk meeting resilience planning. And so we'll have standing items of business continuity plans, emergency planning, category 1 responder and prevent duty. And so it's just for noting that that's the direction of travel for the group, to incorporate these areas as well, which fits with our current responsibilities for risk. We've got the blueprint for good governance, I think you mentioned earlier, and we do truly encourage an integrated approach. And we've also got the new strategic commissioning plan, which we very much link with as part of our group. Recently, we are looking at learning our inspections and triangulating the information from various different sources. So very much continuing to evolve. Adult protection would come under the group as well, so looking forward to another full year, and thanks to everybody who continues to engage with the CCPG and ensures that we have a good functioning group moving forward. Happy to answer any questions. I think Abigail's online if there is any other questions that she's more familiar with than I am.
Thank you very much, Alison, and thank you, Abigail, for compiling the report. In terms of the resilience planning and civil contingencies, that will include future pandemic planning within that, because that was very much prominent in the agenda on Monday at the conference. Thanks.
Yes, so it will, as category 1 responders. Jill's maybe more familiar with linking with NHS Tayside around that.
Okay, thanks, Jill.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of work that we need to progress in terms of the IGB's responsibility as a Category 1 responder as part of the Civil Contingencies Act. So Abby and myself are doing a bit of work on that at the moment, and the overall plan will be brought back duly to the IGB in terms of progress. But it is an area of work that we do need to pick up on.
And I'm sure there'll be lots of learning out of the inquiries as well. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Alison on this? I always find this a really fascinating report. It just shows the breadth and the depth of the work that our clinical colleagues do to make sure that we're providing safe services. I really value it. Thank you both for that. Anyone, any questions? Jill?
Sorry, Chair, not a question. I suppose it's just reflecting the social work professional element through care clinical professional governance as well.
Thanks, yeah, I was kind of covered in that. Thank you very much. And if we can note, I think we're being asked to, yes, the 4 recommendations there, can we agree all of those? Thank you very much. That's lovely, thanks. Karen, sorry, did you have your hand up there? No, okay. Thanks. Right, that takes us on then to our annual performance dashboard. I think that'll be Gillian taking us into that.
Thank you, Chair. So this is us bringing our annual update back in relation to performance over the last year, 22-23. I think just a couple of things to pull out is that this report is in relation to our previous strategic commissioning plan. So the targets that are there are based on the previous strategic commissioning plan. I think the other thing just to raise is that the availability of data is significantly challenging to get this report to the IJB in June. So some of the indicators you will see are only up to Q3 December 2022. That will be updated for the full annual report being submitted to Scottish Government by the end of July, and we are on track to do that. And it's just it's a data cleansing process that we have to go through. We've pulled out some of the areas as included in the cover report, and there is more detail in the overarching report. I'm not going to pick up on every single one of them in detail. We've touched on the unmet need, and just in relation to falls, I know Alison mentioned it earlier, there's been a lot of work done on falls, and I remember a couple of years ago coming with the report, and there'd been quite a significant reduction, but it was during lockdown, and we acknowledged that we would see a change in performance around that once obviously lockdown, and we're back to normal now, and we are beginning to see that increase. So I am pleased to say that there is a lot of work that has been recommenced in relation to falls within the partnership this year. Angela's on the phone on the call, so if there is any specific question, she's one of the leads around that work. In terms of going forward, we are aiming to bring reports back continually in December and June, but one of the things that we do need to do, and members will reflect the April IGB when we had approval for the new strategic commissioning plan, that we will be coming out to engage around target setting and ask for IGB's approval on those targets once they have been worked through. Happy to take any questions without going through the full report, Chair.
Thank you very much, Joel. And I just wonder if some targets around prevention and early intervention could focus in that as well. Set our thinking. I think that's been raised nationally, but I think if we were to do our own thing to set the ball rolling, it would be really helpful. And I also wondered, before I go to questions, if we could just capture the fact that the data will be updated prior to publication and sending to the Scottish Government in one of the recommendations. The first one, I think. If we can do that, that would be helpful, just to have that governance ticked off there. Any questions? I see Catherine online has her hand up. Catherine?
Thank you, Chair. I was really pleased to hear the updates in terms of the performance and also the plan to review targets in line with the new strategic plan. A couple of areas where those targets could helpfully be revisited in terms of the impact of the demography that we experience in Angus, and also what we know about the shift in the balance of care away from care home provision. So I think certainly those targets around personal care hours probably do need to be reconsidered in that light. Separately, also just following on from your own point, Chair, in relation to activities that we can consider at the very preventative end. I think I have previously highlighted the benefit of universal applications and processes for powers of attorney, and I know that colleagues on the call have been doing a significant amount of work around that, but it was just to really encourage and promote in this more public forum anybody in our community having a power of attorney significantly reduces the likelihood of any delay as a result of needing a guardianship to be applied for either privately or through the local authority, and in and of itself can avoid unnecessary and undue delays when there has been an adverse incident or occurrence. And separately, also just in relation to falls, and I wonder whether or not there's anybody that might be able to say anything more substantial about this in the call, but just in terms of that kind of preventative approach again. We have heard previously about some exploration of wearable technology that members of the public can access in relation to tracking the risk and likelihood of a fall, and wondering whether or not that's something that we can hear a little in due course. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. And I think I could bring in Sally Wilson there. Sally, if you're available. Thanks.
Yeah, very happy to join. Thank you very much. In relation to your comment about wearable devices, Catherine, we did test that in Angus. Unfortunately, it wasn't at the best of times because it was just about when COVID hit. So it wasn't followed up. Unfortunately, it just wasn't possible to do that. But there's certainly no harm in revisiting that. In relation to falls, we are investing in some more training for better balance classes across Angus as part of the work with the prevention and proactive care work that we're doing. And we're also investing in some other better conversations and how we can improve conversations with members of the public about looking after themselves. So we will be having a development session about all the activities that we're doing in relation to prevention and proactive care later. I think it's August it's scheduled for SPG and IJB. So look forward to them.
Thank you very much. And any questions? Yeah, Lois.
Yep, thank you. Under 3, improving health, wellbeing and independence, and the following item with regards to support and caring needs at home. Sorry, page 250 and 251. And then it follows on to respite on 253. And then the support and care needs at home. So just kind of that area there of business in terms of, quite rightly, there is a focus on older people over 65. But we know that there's increasing complex cases in younger adults. And I just wondered whether we need to kind of have a focus around bringing statistics on that cohort, given how crucial it is in their early stages of adulthood that we are indeed supporting, their health and well-being and independence. I know that there is a number of cases where there's issues with accessing resource centres. There's issues for young people who do have a complex care need but do wish to live independently, that are not managing to. There's certainly a lengthy wait time. They could be waiting decades before they're able to leave the family home. And I just wondered if we should be shining a spotlight on that cohort.
Thank you, Councillor Speed. A simple answer, yes. There's a lot of work that we need to do in terms of the fuller data pack and splitting out physical, mental health and learning disability so that we can really start to understand what's happening in each of the service areas to identify areas for improvement going forward. There's a lot of work. We've now got the newly established performance steering group where all of this is going to come through, and we will be developing much fuller data packs. Obviously, coming to the IJB, we've got to report on the national indicators as well. And if you reflect back to the Strategic Commissioning Plan in April, we have specifically added in information in the demographics, not just around older people, because we felt that that was important and that reflects the demographics across Angus. So we need to make sure that we've got the performance measures around all of those demographic and all of the service areas.
Anyone else have any questions? Alison?
Thanks, Chair. It was just to acknowledge your concern, Lois, and also to highlight that the Prevention and Proactive Care Group is very specifically looking at the younger adults and taking a getting it right for everyone approach, where we're able to use systems to gather the information that makes people at higher risk of hospital admission, and looking at how they present across all services. And we're looking at that as both identifying people that might help us look at individuals, but also in seeing if we can reduce the people being admitted by using that as our measure of any of the interventions that we're implementing. So we are linked with a national programme around getting it right for everyone that looks to make sure that everybody can access services. We have got a development day for the strategic planning group, and I'm just thinking here off the top of my head about ensuring that that might be something you might be interested to hear about, that prevention and proactive care work stream, because it has come up quite a bit today.
Thanks, Alison. You want to come back? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's encouraging to hear. I think that bit of work is crucial, because we know that obviously there are lots of children and young people who will have a GIRFIC plan, you know, throughout their childhood within school, and we know that then transition can be a really, really difficult time, and so I think that does need to be joined up, and we know the pressures within kind of children's services, within children mental health services, you know, increased wait times, and then often that transition not being smooth. So I think that's crucial. We need to make sure that we are getting it right, absolutely for everyone, but for those young people and then, you know, young adults coming in to our services.
Thank you. And I see Angela Murphy online. Angela.
Thanks. I just wondered if it would be okay just to mention briefly around the work that we're doing with Falls and our newly revitalised Falls group, which has got a much wider remit and membership, but that we are very much including Falls of all ages of adults. So it's not exclusively older people, which I have to confess we've very much concentrated on in the past. We've got particular emphasis looking at learning disability and physical disabilities, and bringing in these services with the Falls strategy and the work that's going on, so it's not exclusively age related.
Thank you. Everyone finds that helpful. Anyone else got any questions for that? I think the report reflects a really challenging time in the history of our lives, actually, and really grateful to all the effort that's gone into supporting the level of demand and the report itself. So if we can, with that minor edit that I raised at the start, if we can approve those recommendations 1 and 2, I'd be very grateful. Thank you very much, everyone. That's super. And now it's on to the Angus Alcohol and Drugs Partnership and ADAR's update, and that is Jill and Karen Melville. Karen, if you can come down here so we can see you. Thank you very much. It's nice to meet you in real life.
Thank you, Chair. Again, really happy to bring this report. It's a service area and work that I actually do feel passionately about, and I think it's really great to see that coming through the IJB, and you'll notice that we are keen to continue to do that as a reporting mechanism for the Alcohol and Drugs Partnership and ADARS. The report is kind of multifactorial, so there's quite a few things just to pick up on, particularly that it's kind of political at the moment in relation to the MAT standard, so people be aware that the full benchmarking report was published yesterday, so the report reflects our performance around MAT standards 1 to 5 last year, and our performance this year around 1 to 5 and the additional 6 to 10, which weren't measured in 2022. We have made good progress, and I think the scores and the RAG status do reflect the progress made, but by no means that we're at the end and there's not more to do, because there absolutely is. We've also got the strategy that's there for approval and support from the IJB, and as part of the ADP reporting to Scottish Government. We've got our annual survey for the IGB to be cited on. That was approved at the ADP just last week. So I think it would be helpful for Karen, if that's okay, just to come in and have a bit of discussion around the detail, particularly around the MAT standards. Again, you'll see we focus on the whole family approach as well, and we are bringing in the culture of kindness work that is being progressed through the Protecting People, because not only for this service area, but it's an area of work that is exceptionally important around that kindness and civility, and people may be aware the Chief Medical Officer report, Realistic Medicine, had a focus on that that was just published a couple of days ago. So there is a real drive around compassion, care and kindness. Karen.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Chair. I think, first of all, I want to start by extending my thanks to the ADP support team around pulling this information together, but furthermore to our organisations and our partner agencies around the work and contribution to this plan. I've only been in this role 6 months now, and I've been hugely impressed by the person-centred approach to things and the proactivity of the services across Angus Health and Social Care Partnership to meet the needs of this vulnerable population. I think that's important to say. That being said, there is a lot of work to be done. We're not naive in thinking that we've cracked it and that everything's okay. And as services, I think we are really keen to listen to the service users and try and meet their needs across the board. I don't really want to go into any more detail with regards to the paper. I think what you've got is a few pages, but underneath that is a whole heap of work and a lot of strategy work and also developmental work that's ongoing across the services. What we are trying to do is to try and pull everything together so that we can report in one mechanism, so that we're not spending a lot of time trying to get data. We're trying to get it as quickly as possible, but also looking at different strategies across Angus and indeed across Tayside and Scotland to ensure that what we are developing is in line with those, but most importantly reflects the needs of our service users. I think the areas that we're looking at within the strategy, the prevention and early intervention, as Jill has said, is hugely important. We're also feeding that strategy into our transitions groups as well to look at just exactly what you were talking about earlier, counsellor speed, young people, maybe care experienced youngsters coming out, finding their own homes, how they're going to find their feet, working with homeless teams. Developing recovery oriented systems of care. We actually have ongoing this afternoon as a development session to completely refresh that agenda, and that's multi-agency, and we've been seeking service user employment into that as well. I think it's really important to get it right for children and families. I think that's been reflected around a lot of the conversation today, that the families are really important. They can be a huge support network, but they can also find it really difficult living with people who are using substances and all that affects that, and it's important that we access them as well and get them locked into the correct services at the right time. I think overall, the last one says less harm is caused by alcohol, but I think overall what we want to do is to decrease the harm associated with substance use across Angus Health and Social Care Partnership. So although that's in line with the national statements and the national mission, and that's the target, we are absolutely fundamentally looking at substance use and its harms as a whole and looking to reduce that. I really don't want to take up any more of your time. I can talk for Scotland, but I won't. But happy to take any if that's okay.
Karen, thank you very much. And just to pick up on Gillian's point, I think Lois and I spent some considerable time making sure that this report line was in place. So we'd be very keen, I'm guessing you agree, to keep that. It's really important. And I think the national focus is vital. Really value the work on it, and Lois and I both sit on the ADP as well, so we're very much aware of the depth of work that goes on underneath that. And in fact, Professor Sir Gregor Smith was talking on Monday about the impact nationally of minimum unit pricing as a key public health measure that has had an impact on the levels of alcohol use in this country. So, you know, keeping a weather eye on things like that, I think, are really important, and I really appreciate your report today. Lois, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, thank you. Just to really echo what Julie said, really appreciate this report being on the agenda within the IGB and the works that the partnership and indeed ADARS carries out day in, day out, supporting, you know, some of our very, you know, most vulnerable within Angus. Absolutely fully support the kind of the progress around the culture of kindness. And one thing that really does pain me far too regular is still the stigma and the misuse of words and language, and, you know, often the community's response to people who you know, are just going through just so much horrific circumstances day in, day out because of their addiction. And, you know, I know many who just so wish that their lives were different, and, you know, it's just a really, really difficult situation for them to be in. But I won't even say the word, but the J word, I just really wish that that would be removed, and that it wasn't seen as socially acceptable, like other words that are no longer socially acceptable to say. However, you know, day in, day out, I either hear it or see it written on social media platforms and the likes, and I just wonder what we can do as an IGB, as a partnership, to really try and challenge kind of the stigma and the terminology that's been used.
I think it all starts with each one of us to tackle that, and I've had to do that in community councils, for example, where members have used that language, which is just totally not on ever. But there is a programme that we have been involved with, and I think Jill will come on to that.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to say that we've all got a role and responsibility in terms of role modelling that behaviour in the language. It's also an area of work around mental health as well, because there's continues to be a level of stigma around mental health as well. So how we can extend that culture of kindness, and that's what I was trying to say. This is everybody's business. It's actually not service specific. We should actually just be being kind anyway, as part of our day-to-day work. So I think part of that is around how we engage with the service users as well. And if we've got that positive engagement with them and the language that's being used as part of the work that the service, how we're working with them, with the wider communities in terms of the recovery bean cafes, etc., then only then we can start to shift. This is a massive shift, and it's a movement rather than an overnight thing. And we're not alone. And Karen and I, in previous roles, have seen the impact of some of that, and how much it does impact on people in terms of the stigma, because they don't understand the trauma that people have actually gone through to be in the position that they're in. So having a kind approach, but having that trauma-informed practice is really, really important as well.
Just, to come back, absolutely. And I think, you know, you're right, it is about an individual kind of responsibility to challenge, but also do believe that there's, you know, power in numbers as well, and that to take a kind of united kind of approach to it as well, and be recognised as an authority and as a partnership, but, you know, just as one body that actually just kind of says no to that language.
Thank you. And I see Catherine wants to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I just couldn't agree more with the comments that have just been made. Everybody who's using a service is a valued and a precious sister or a brother, a cousin or a friend, a colleague, a human. And actually it's really important that our language constantly and consistently reflects their value in our community. So I completely and wholeheartedly agree with the comments that have been made already. I welcome the report in itself, the collaborative work that it represents. It was really good to note note the attention that's been paid to cross-cutting themes, the multi kind of factorial issues that are impacting on people's lives we know are complex, and the intersect between mental health and well-being, children and young people, both as carers and also those experiencing uses of substances that are causing them difficulties, and of course the intersect with the justice service. So all of that being part of the strategies is really important and key and welcome. In relation to the public health approach to justice, substance misuse is certainly one facet of what needs to be considered, both to prevent offending in the first place, but also to reduce the risk of reoffending once people are in that kind of space. I have spoken with the lead officer in the just to reflect on the need perhaps for some further refinement of the how we will do it statements and the how we will know statements in that particular section, which I'm more than happy to pick up off table. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Catherine. Jill wants to come back in.
Thank you. It was remiss of me to miss this out, but actually a really important point when we're talking about young adults and proactive care. So we've now got education as part of the ADP, which is actually first, and that's a really, really positive move in housing as well. So they are hopefully going to be active participants on the Angus ADP, so that we can start to look at how we can actually work with schools, education to deliver training, etc. within, and Police Scotland are obviously part of that as well, and regularly through their community officers deliver that training. So how we really join that up is important, and I think it's a really positive step for the ADP going forward.
Thank you very much. Any more questions or comments at all? No? Okay, thank you very much for all the work. If you pass that back to the agencies involved in that, that would be great. And we can hopefully approve all the recommendations there on page 263, 1 to 5. Thank you very much. And now we move on to prescribing management update. And Scott, you get a medal for hanging on in there. If we can pass over to you now, please, for item 16. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you everyone for being so patient. I appreciate the length of such a meeting and the ability to concentrate, and I will try to present this succinctly. You've obviously had the papers to digest, and happy to answer any specific questions on it. Some key bits to highlight. Interesting to listen to the other papers actually going through this. There's threads here that coincide and join a lot of what we were talking about with regards to sustainability, with regards to costs increasing, with regards to access to people and shortages in pharmacists, which was alluded to earlier, and these all are cross-linked, including the piece of paper, the paper on the primary care improvement. So there are interlinkages there which shouldn't are evident to members of the board. Highlighting just a couple of really key things to your attention. First of all, just within the current position, you'll see the cost per items across Scotland are steadily and quite significantly increasing. So that's the cost that we pay per item prescribed, and those costs are driven. They're set centrally. We don't set them obviously ourselves or have any influence on that, and those costs are steadily increasing, and it's chance what things go up by price, and if you prescribe more of that in your area, you will be paying more proportionately for that. Even during this meeting, another torrent of price increases came through for some very common items. Penicillin, for example, just gone up in price. Clotrimazole, Canesten cream just went up in price. So some very common items going up in price as we speak. If you look at the reassurance for the board at the next graph, reassuringly the number of items per 1,000 weighted patients. So that's the amount we spend per patient. That's the amount of items we prescribe per patient in Angus is very steady, and it's nice to see that despite over the past 2 to 3 years of the increasing work we are doing within primary care, that we're managing to keep on top of the number of items that we utilise, which is very reassuring. That said, we're not complicit in our responsibilities. You'll see within the proposals, and was alluded to by Mr. Berry, our Chief Finance Officer, within his section about that projected overspend against the budget which is allocated to it, for which has not been driven by more prescribing, it's been driven by increased costs of the items that we're prescribing. We're not complicit to say that every single thing, and there's nothing to do here at all. We can't just sit on our laurels at all with prescribing. There's always work to do. So we've set out there within paragraph 4 our ongoing commitment and our reinvigoration to try and make sure that we reduce any waste. We make sure that every item is made best use of. We address polypharmacy and the harms that come from it. Falls was alluded to earlier, and polypharmacy can be a component to that. A diligent review of our care home patients, which is ongoing and needs continual work, to be honest, because there's always new patients there. Serial prescribing is a form of prescribing to try and make sure that things are easier for patients to access, but also mandate some review processes within them as well. There's an array of controls alluded to within the paper, which I won't go into in more detail, but suffice to reassure the IGB that I've been involved in prescribing within the partnership for 7 or 8 years, and this takes me back to that 2016 kind of era for those that we face a similar challenge. That said, I would highlight to the board that things are different. We are struggling with regards to a couple of factors. First of all, there are not the easy gains that there were back then, and also the contract, I think, has to be brought in there as well, and the availability of staff. There are a lot of pressures on our staff as to what we deliver. We have a contract to deliver with regards to supporting that broader multidisciplinary team and the work of the pharmacy teams who are hard at work to try and increase the safety of prescribing through the work that they do. But at the same time, we are then potentially trying to ask them to look at trying to help us reduce polypharmacy and reduce waste. Those are two things which, when you have a tighter number of people to deliver, do give challenge for us to try and make sure that we have sufficient people to do all the tasks that are ahead of us. 2016, we didn't have that issue, and we could really kind of get going with that one single focus, but that's not the case now, and we have to do so mindful that this is a challenge not just for us. You can see those in those graphs that these challenges apply all over Scotland. So happy to answer any questions, and around the room you have some good expertise there with Dr. Clement and with Mr. Berry and others in the room, so we're all fairly familiar with it, and but happy to answer any questions, and I will endeavour to do so. I'm mindful of your time.
Scott, thank you very much. That was very comprehensive. I've got a stinker of a question for you before I open it up to the room. I'm really sorry. Just thinking about the environment, you mentioned sustainability. So the environment and climate action mitigations, will we start to see this coming through in this particular report as we're looking at medications, for example, that have less environmental impact? And I know asthma inhalers are always the one that's used as an example, but I wonder if you could give us something on that before I open it to the room, because I think we'd find it may be an environmental benefit, but the cost might become an issue, and I'm not fully conversant with that. So anything you've got would be great.
Yeah, of course. So, the climate emergency, the CMO's report, which Ms. Galloway referred to earlier, so the Chief Medical Officer's report, page 47, for those who would be interested, does specifically mention it. I think the first CMO's report to describe it in quite as much detail as has been before, but it's certainly a very high agenda item for us, and I'll describe some of the parts that we're doing within that. But just to put it into numbers for you, the National Health Service accounts for about 5.4% of the UK carbon emissions in general practice. The majority of the emissions are from prescribing. A quarter of that is from inhalers. So you're absolutely right to highlight inhalers if not that it's that. They're just to put it into example, just to be easy, so an equivalent of one inhaler, going through one inhaler is the equivalent of driving 175 miles. So that kind of gives you a feel for what that is. And these are pressurized inhalers. These are the inhalers that you squeeze and it sprays. So that's that. So that is a really important issue, and it's right to highlight that. Reassuringly, the respiratory MCN, the Managed Clinical Network, is working very closely with us within formulary to make sure that we are making it very easy for prescribers to know which are the low environmental impact inhalers. And also with that, I'm part of a national group where we produce data on the environmental impact of inhalers across boards and partnerships and practices, that we can now see that data live. And you can see within practices and within partnerships and within boards what percentage of the inhalers they use are more environmentally friendly. There are other impacts from at the NHS, including anaesthesia and other impacts. I would say that the low-hanging fruit to start is the inhalers, but there are other areas to address. But with regards to reporting on that, I would be more than happy in future reports were it to be a pertinent issue for the IGB, and I think it is. I think that's a great idea to see about including that and about the work we're doing to look at that within, as I've just alluded to, the workforce constraints that we have. But it's definitely something that's up there, and definitely the nurses who are looking at inhalers really do know about that, but absolutely happy to support and encourage that extremely important work.
Thank you, Scott. I'd appreciate that moving forward. I think it's really important. Anyone got any questions for Scott? Gail, can I bring Gail in?
Hi, Scott. I don't suppose it's a question, really. It's making a point. I know that we've got in the third recommendation about requesting an update back in August, Scott, but I think it's just the real challenge. If we don't change our prescribing practices, our spend will go up. It continues to go up. Now, what that means to the IGB is that we need to look at other areas where we don't spend money. So I think there's an ownership on everybody here, Scott, and all the multidisciplinary and professional teams around what we do, all of us around the prescribing practices. And we all heard this week or last week from David Coulson about the challenges with recruiting pharmacists. So I think there's a responsibility on everybody here to ensure we tackle this. So thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. George.
Thank you, Chair. It's regarding the quality impact assessment, which it says is not required. If we're, no, I'm not a clinician, but if we're looking at fitting prescribing into a budget, to me sounds like some people might not get something, or we're going to have to do something to fit into a budget. Doesn't that mean that some people will be adversely affected and some of them might be protected groups? But we don't have anything that says it's not required.
Okay, Scott.
Happy to come back on that. I would say that as a doctor and as a clinician, and for my nursing colleagues and HP colleagues as well, anyone that's a prescriber, the needs of their patient are first and foremost. And if a patient needs a medicine, I have absolutely no doubt within Angus and throughout Tayside that anybody that requires a medication which is licensed and is the effective medicine for that will get access to it were it to be recommended within the national frameworks for such a thing, which is decided at a national level. With regards to those challenging conversations that you allude to, I would say that I have a very close relationship working with our Chief Finance Officer about the costs of medicines within Angus, and where, as we are already projecting, there's nothing within the suggested proposals that is suggesting that medications which are licensed and are the right medication for the patient are going to be stopped at all. And I have no concerns that we will be at all looking to neglect our responsibilities to individual patients, and if needs be, as I think Gail was alluding to, I'm sorry if the budget goes over. It's not always within my means to control that, and if patients are getting the right medications and we're not seeing an uplift in the budget commensurate with the costs that we're trying to incur, I'm trying my best to meet that, but I can't help if the patient needs those medications and get it. I would rather do that, and I parked that problem with our Chief Officer and our Chief Finance Officer and said, I'm really sorry, but I've tried my best and they know I've tried my best. And for yourselves as elected members to then help us make those difficult decisions about what we have to do next. But I would say the needs of our patients come first, and if it's agreed nationally that that's what we're paying for, then that's what we're paying for. Yeah, I would say that that's... if that becomes necessary, that's a disappointing time to get to.
Thank you, and I hope you forgive me for paraphrasing, but when I came into the IGB in 2017, we had an overspend of about £2.5 million, if memory serves. And there was a lot of work done on polypharmacy, so people getting prescriptions, so 10 and over prescriptions, for example, and there's a kind of law of diminishing returns. I think it's fair to say, I'm pleased to see Scott nodding there, where medications start to counteract each other. So that was some focused work, and I think Scott is alluding to there that that's a conversation with the doctor, looking at what medicines that person's on, and if there are any that they no longer need to be on, or there's something new that could actually be more efficient for the best outcome for them. So that was a really powerful piece of work, I think, and Alison might want to say something else about that. But it was absolutely geared towards you can be on too many prescriptions when your health starts to be negatively impacted. So it was coming at it from that point of view, but it also had that financial benefit as well. Thanks. Yeah, do you want to come in again?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy if it's the position that nobody will be adversely affected, and it was in relation to the equality impact assessment, then I accept, then obviously you would do.
Did you want to come in, Alison?
Yeah, so as Scott said, it's not for us to decide whether people have access to medicines or not. If it's agreed by the Scottish Medicines Consortium, then that's what we are prescribed. And it's also, there's good governance in NHST side around what's available. Julie, you're quite right around the work around polypharmacy. Some of the challenges we've got now are that we don't have a lot of capacity within our pharmacy workforce. We've got the new GP contract, and there's a real tension between focusing on quality, focusing on primary care sustainability, so helping GP practices manage, and doing things that provide savings. So the challenge is best value, and where can we get the most value? I would add to climate sustainability is obviously helped by polypharmacy work because you're doing less, but also waste is a real problem, and as Gail said, it's all of our responsibilities around making sure we're doing the right thing around prescribing, but it's the public as well, and really making sure that we're making best use of our health services and providing alternatives to a medication such as, I think, exercise is the best medicine kind of approach that we've had previously, and we had a discussion this morning, Sally and I, around how we revamp some of that thinking and ensuring people are aware. Really important. If you don't want to take your medicines, have a discussion with someone, because the most expensive medicine is the one that's just not needed. Thank you.
Valid point. Thanks. Yes,
yeah,
Andrew.
I think Alison just beat me to it. I mean, we've mentioned prevention, proactive care, and just about in every paper except this one. And I think there is a link again, and I think that was alluded to by the previous speaker's comments. What I'm wondering is, when will we start seeing the benefits of prevention and proactive care, social prescribing reflected in the performance reports that we get, not just in the pharmacy reports, because clearly it's not through over-prescribing, it's through pressures of inflation that the graphs are going up. But surely there's got to be some kind of link between social prescribing, walking, if you can do it, not everybody can walk, and then and the fall in, and the increase in performance and the fall in pharmacological costs.
That's easy for you to say. I wonder if I could maybe bring in Hayley around the social prescribing element of that. Is that okay, Hayley?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just in regards to the social prescribing question, Andrew, I think what we're looking at the moment, and it's something that we've had to spend a bit of time doing, is looking at a full evaluations around the service. It was very difficult to do that at the beginning, basically because we started the service right in the middle of, well, right at the beginning of COVID. So what we thought the model would be and what it had to be were two different things. But we're now on much more of a steady slope, to be fair, going forward, and looking at, well, how do we build on this and what impact is it actually having? So although we're data rich in regards to how many patients we're seeing and what the issues are and where we're referring on to, but what we're trying to do now is really drill down a bit deeper into, one, what impact is this actually having on the members of the community, and two, what impact is it having on the practices in which the social prescribers are based in. As well as all that, in regards to the evaluation, Scott and some of the social prescribers have actually been working on like projects, like little programmes in each of the practices, and that's targeting like either frequent attenders to the practices, and really actually the social prescribers reaching out to them rather than awaiting a patient kind of coming and asking us for support. And that's a really new, different way of working as well. As I say, that's a new pilot. We're also away to kick one off in Arbroath too. So what we'll have is a lot of information based on, well, how does that work differently to us kind of waiting and a patient being referred on. It's been a bit more proactive in regards to that prevention work, and I think we've heard that a lot today, prevention and proactive care. So we're turning the model on its head a little bit at the moment.
Excellent, thanks Hayley. Scott, did you want to come in on Andrew's question at all?
I didn't know you had such a well-informed speaker sitting there who would more capably answer, but just to answer, yeah, she alluded to, we're looking specifically at that issue, and you're absolutely right. I think we're looking at our very high attenders, in fact, and trying to encourage them to engage with that. So people that are seeing us a lot and attending a lot for medical type interventions where very clearly the social determinants of health might need supported. So we're trying to evidence that and work out how to best make use of it. So it's great that Hayley was there to answer that more eloquently.
Super, thank you very much, Scott. And if there are no more questions or comments, there is, sorry. Alison.
I'll be very quick. It's just borrowing from, I think it's Morag's paper that came to the prevention and proactive care. In Audit Scotland say a pulmonary rehab classes for every patient, it saves 4 bed days per patient at a cost of £2,000. So for me, it's very difficult to determine and see in the headline figures that what our approach has reduced bed days. I'm hoping that that's what happens. But for me, it's about the performance indicators, picking out some of these key interventions. And if we can identify that we've got so many people through these interventions, then that will help and that will come to the performance. So there are some measures, but it's incredibly difficult to prove that it's your intervention that resulted in the intended outcome.
Indeed. Thank you. Does that help, Andrew?
Yes, thank you. I was just trying to make the point that you can't take anything in isolation. It's all linked.
I think we're all on that page, Andrew. It's fine. Thank you very much. And could I just go back to recommendations and the third one? Is that August 2023 timescale doable? Scott, for you?
Scott,
you're on mute, Scott.
Mr. Berry wishes to come in, I think, and jump me.
Right.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. That's fine.
So
that's all
I say that partly because although we're writing it down here, it's not the first time we've said it, and the paper you've seen here is really a stopping off point. And if we haven't managed to get where we need to by August, and the odd thing about saying in August is we know to get a paper to the IGB in August, it's kind of got to be written within about 4 or 5 weeks of now. But yeah, we'll have to share whatever we have. And if it doesn't go as far as we feel it can go, if we haven't been able to be as specific as we can be by August, we'll just have to revisit that and come back to another one. But we have been talking about this for quite some time. So I really hope we can have a good go at translating what we've said in this paper into something a bit more concrete. But if we need a bit more time, we'll have to come back.
Thank you. I think in terms of time, because we're bringing the new strategic or the updated strategic delivery plan back in August as well, I think that would come well. And I think just hearing what everybody's saying, I'm just reflecting. I think we'll add something in around climate change to our strategic delivery plan as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you. So I'm glad to ask the question. Scott, thank you so much. And if I can move that we approve the recommendations 1 to 3 as described in the paper. Thank you very much, everyone. And we're getting there, everyone. If I can now take us to item 17, which is the NHS Tayside and Social Care Digital Update. And it's Louise and Angela. Thank you both. Anyone want to kick that off?
Happy to start, Angela, if that's okay. So thank you. I'm Louise McTaggart. I'm Head of Digital Strategic Delivery and I'm standing in for our Director Lake today. We submitted a paper providing an update on some of the programmes of delivery for the digital strategy that was previously agreed and published in 2022. 2. And there's 2 recommendations on the paper to acknowledge the overarching digital strategy and some of the programmes of work, and we've given a bit more detail in the appendix. And also, I think the second point is timescales for mobile devices to support the implementation of a community system in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Angela, did you want to add anything before I open it up to questions?
Yeah, I'll just mention briefly. So I'm Angela Murphy, AHP lead in Angus, but I also lead on digital. So the other side of what we've included in this paper is the Angus status with a lot of these digital developments, and probably the main one that is going to concern a lot of the staff within Angus is the new electronic patient record that will come with the implementation of Morse, and along with that the ability to work on a more mobile basis than we have been before. But happy to answer any questions relating to Angus, and Louise is much better at most of the Tayside things.
Thank you very much. Have any questions? Yes, Karen Fletcher. Thanks.
So you probably realise that I would ask a question, Louise, Angela, and it's in relation to the rollout of Morse. So I know that Morse has been purchased, but I didn't see a timescale. Is there an estimated timescale around implementation for Morse?
Louise, thanks.
Thank you.
Well, I think Louise has come in, but I'm not sure if she's frozen as well.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear.
So with the timescales are not set yet, Karen. We have having our first project board meeting in July or the end of June, I think, and we've been very lucky to secure Gail as the SRO for the project. So we need to establish the definition and the scope and the sequence. So there are no timescales. The quicker we can do it, the better, because we can stop paying costs for EMIS, which would be a cost saving, but we need to recognise this is a significant change for a number of the services. We have about 6,500 staff currently using EMIS Web, so we need to work up a project plan and the timescale. So it's not set yet, Karen.
Okay, you want to come back on that? Or no? Fine. Okay. Thank you. Peter Drury.
Well, thank you, Chair. I fully support the digital strategy, and it's great that digital tools have been rolled out, and it's great that they're intuitive. My question is, are the staff fully trained up to make the most of them, and will they actually use them? Because we heard earlier on in this meeting that Near Me has fallen off, and now the patients nor clinicians seem to be too keen on them.
Thank you, Peter. Angela?
Apologies, I just got chucked out at a completely wrong time there. The staff will be trained in the use of Morse as it comes online, and that's part of the plans and the implementation, and they will absolutely use it this time. The previous EMIS that we had, it turned out it wasn't actually usable very well for community staff, whereas Morse is designed for community staff, and all the staff are actually very eager to get onto an electronic patient record and to have access to information when they are out and about. So there's a lot of motivation towards it. I'm sure there are the odd person that is perhaps less excited about it than some others, but certainly the majority of the staff realise that we have to get onto an electronic patient record in order to function in the way that we need to.
That's great, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Just in the number 3, priority of digital strategies, empowering patients, giving patients access to the right information and interactions. I don't know, I was hearing that it was access to patient records, but I'm maybe not hearing that correctly. But I think, again, this is an enabler for prevention and proactive care, and specifically in the aspect of patients taking ownership of their own health conditions. So I'd be interested in hearing more, not today, but in the future, because it's getting late. Hearing in the future of how that is going to develop and how that supports the new prevention agenda. Thank you.
Before anyone wants to answer that, Angela or Louise, I know there will be a variety of apps through, service areas nationally. There will be lots of apps are being developed at the minute, and in thinking about the one that I have on my phone around falls. Can't remember exactly what it's called now, but it is there, so I thought I'd try it. So it won't just be what's developed in Angus. People will have a lot of opportunity. I guess building on the work that was done during the pandemic around the sort of track and trace kind of model where people can feed in data and emerging trends can be identified, for example. Does anyone else want to contribute to that for Andrew? Because I've just taken that over. Louise.
So specifically for this paper and for Morse, that patient access to that application, but you're right, there's a national procurement for something called the Digital Front Door, which will provide access for patients to book appointments, see letters, possibly see their part of their medical records and their vaccinations. So that's being developed and procured at national level that boards can feed into. And there are also small pockets of other systems that patients can access, such as GP appointments if they permit that. So there are some pockets of solutions already available in Tayside and across Scotland, but I would say the largest one that will hopefully come at some point soon is the Digital Front Door, which will radically change that access and for patients to feed into their own care.
Yes, keep an eye on the App Store, Andrew. Thank you very much. And actually, sorry, George, sorry. You need to be a bit more assertive.
I start waving my hands. It's just the talk of Morse. There's been an explanation of what it is, obviously. But when I first hear it, and unless I've missed it in the papers, I don't have any idea what Morse stands for, apart from Morse code. It would be quite nice if Morse was explained. I mean, I know what it is because it's been said it's a patient record type thing. But just for future.
Okay, I think point taken for future. Don't necessarily need to go into that. Angela, I was going to say something else. Angela, do you want to come in?
No, I was just going to briefly say that it doesn't stand for anything. It's just the name of it.
Okay, delighted. That's fantastic. Okay, thank you very much. So unless there are any more questions or comments, I know what I was going to say. It would be good to get an update on the Angus rollout of the devices, and building on the back of Karen's question, Louise, and I just wondered if that would be possible, even if it's an email out that we can circulate to all IGB members when there's a more tangible timescale on that. Because I know it's something that's been talked about for a long time, and it'd be really good to see point of delivery. Thanks.
So just in response, Chair, that's actually sitting with the HSCP to decide and design what model and what device they want to use and how many they need. So that's not sitting with digital. It will be a complementary piece of work to go alongside the implementation of Morse. Sorry, I can't hear anything.
Can't hear.
Angela, if you would be able to do that, that would be super. Yeah.
I'll find out exactly what the question was, and I'll put an email. Okay. I went and missed it because I got knocked off, sorry.
Oh, sorry. It was about the timescale for the rollout to the devices for Angus staff. That was all. Thank you.
Okay.
Right. If I can take us back to the recommendations then, 1 and 2 as defined in the paper, are we happy to approve those? Thank you very much. everyone stay where you are, I'm not finished yet. So 2 things first, and then after we've closed the meeting, I still want you to stay, please. First of all, I know the Audit Committee covered this off this morning, but I wanted to say how grateful I am to the support and the contributions of Tony Gaskin, our CIA, what a great job title, our Chief Internal Auditor. Tony has provided a great service to Angus and has been a wise head with quite a wicked sense of humour, and I really wanted the minutes of this meeting to capture that. They really value his role in the organisation, and to wish him all the very best for the next phase of his life. I'm sure it won't be dull. And also, today is Karen Maley's last day. So Gail and I had a bet on about who was going to greet first, and it was me. Just want to say for the minute, Karen, you've been amazing, and we're going to miss you, but congratulations on your new role, and I hope you won't be too far away. And could everyone... I know, it's all going to blotchy. I'm really sorry, we're going to do this again in a minute. But for the record, since I took over as audit chair, you've just been there every step of the way. And since I took over as chair, and I know past chairs and the vice chair will have a similar view. Thank you so much for everything.
Absolutely. Karen. We've been there every step of the way since we took over as an IGB in 2015 or 16. Karen has been there and has guided us all the way through with everything. She keeps us right, particularly me, when I breach things or I get to really breaching things unintentionally. So Karen, I know that you will hate this with a vengeance. I know exactly that, but we ignored you as usual. So Karen, on behalf of everybody, thank you. Thank you so much.
We are rotten. So thank you very much for that, for bearing with me. Still stay in the meeting. The date of the next meeting of the Angus IGB is the 23rd of August at 2 o'clock, and we will have new committee clerk. So we'll be nice. And thank you for all your contributions today. It's been a really busy agenda. I really appreciate your time. Thank you. Right,
John, can you stop the live stream, please?